think as soon as they play against it, they will realize that, hey, this guy's just hitting me for 7k, 8k every turn, and I cannot really hit him back because hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of the OP podcast. I'm Hrvoje, joined by, of course, Yonas and Kai, who is
Hello.
today joining us from someplace in nature. What's that about, Kai?
Yeah, so I'm not at home today, and I didn't want to disturb the people that I was with, so I just came back to where I am always at, around trees. But behind me, we have a rice field, which is a little bit different for my usual setup. So
Which is, of course, being
I'm
on the
here.
branches of trees.
I'm here. Should be fine, but we'll see how everything goes, I guess.
How is your day, Ben, Yonas? Are you ready
Not too
to
bad.
get into this?
It was a relatively uneventful start at an online regional this morning. That didn't go super well, but other than that, it's been a relatively relaxing day. Speaking of regionals, Hrvoje, I heard you had some pretty good news after the Birmingham online or in-person Treasure Cup. How'd that go?
Yeah, so I literally arrived like an hour and a half ago from the airport. I played Green Purple Luffy, and it was a small event, 256 players, but I did get seventh place as it was Swiss only. So yeah, pretty happy with because we only get two EB2 events in Europe. Pretty happy to actually make use of the chance to top with the deck that I really enjoy playing, and I will probably play in OP11, which is kind of the topic of today's podcast. How are we going to handle OP11 with the new starter decks? And I think the best way to start discussing this is how exactly did OP11 meta go in Japan once the ban list hit? Because of course we played the 3v3 before the ban list, but then the meta just kept developing with this massive change. So maybe Kai, if you can give us more insight on what we could expect.
So OP11, we all went to 3v3 in OP11, so I think that we do have a little bit more knowledge than other people who didn't really play in OP11 before the West did. But for us, when we went there, I think that the meta was pretty stable. It was like blue purple Luffy, green purple Luffy, but there was a debate between which one was better at the time. And then it was like, what do you bring for the third deck? Obviously, we can't play black yellow Luffy like we did in our 3v3 because that deck was banned after we went. But since then, the meta has developed a little bit, but it's mainly in the form of two decks that entered the meta. The first deck that entered the meta was Black Lucci, and then through Black Lucci, using this new package with 10 cost Kuzung and 8 cost Jack in tandem, being able to clear a 9 cost every single turn, was a way that you can maybe beat Blue Purple Luffy, maybe not consistently, but beat a lot of the Blue Purple Luffy counters very well. And then, obviously, with the rise of Lucci became the rise of Teach, and then after a little while, people found a new version of Purple Luffy, which doesn't run the standard Luftaro Sangoro package, and instead just runs all of the really aggro rush cards like 4 7 cost Sanji, 4 9 cost Luffy, to just kind of ruin the opponent's day before they really get a chance to get onto the board stably. So, since you guys left, that's kind of in the meta development in Japan. It ended up being a pretty stable meta if we look at the most recent OP11 regional that we had in Japan, where actually Blue Purple Luffy only was 3 out of the top 16 decks in the tournament. It doesn't mean that Blue Purple Luffy isn't by far the best deck in the format, but it means that we do have a little bit more diversity in the meta going into OP12 in Japan now.
I was also seeing some very aggressive decks. We saw a little bit when we were in Japan, but pre-ban list, but in the IGCS, I did see like a lot of Bella Betty and Zoro performing well. Are those decks still just doing well because of the presence of blue purple, or are those decks kind of like still very strong in their own right?
So Bella Betty is. Bella Betty is very uniquely situated in the meta, where it's basically the only deck that has a consistently winning matchup into Blue Purple Luffy, but it's extremely winning, like 80% plus winning versus Blue Purple Luffy. Once you flip your leader, you're in a really bad spot for Blue Purple Luffy, unless you tech for the matchup. Even if you tech for the matchup, it makes it only 65-60% winning for Blue Purple Luffy. Zoro, on the other hand, actually, I don't think beats Blue Purple Luffy. I believe that matchup is winning for Blue Purple Luffy, but that just talks to how absurd that deck is. But the reason why people playing Zoro is because it does well into a lot of these other decks that people bring, like, for example, Bella Betty, and also these other sorts of random decks that people try to bring to counter the meta like purple Luffy.
Yeah, I also think Bello Betty got some showcase. Like today, there was either two Grand Asia Opens. I want to say Kuala Lumpur or one of the Southeast Asian countries, and pretty much every feature match was Bello Betty against something. Like I'm not joking, and all of those feature matches were all in like 10 to 15 minutes, and there's just a ton of dead time on the stream. And it was just kind of ridiculous to watch
Yeah.
because even these games where Bello Betty would brick so ridiculously hard, or at least look like a brick, Blue Purple Luffy would still die like turn 5. And it didn't feel like
Yeah.
there's anything much they can do. Like they have the Lin, they reduce the board a little bit, like a bricky, very underdeveloped board. They only have two bodies to attack with, and then they still get slammed. And yeah, that is kind of how the meta has developed since. I think the biggest surprise to me was the like rise of Wuchi again with the Tenko Skuzan, because I thought that was like for sure gone with Ice Age and Moria. But you know, what is dead may never die or something. Like he just always comes back.
That's terrible. Yeah.
Is there anything else you guys would like to maybe mention before we head into probably the most exciting addition to the format, at least for us in the list, which are the starter decks?
I wanted to briefly mention how difficult of a spot Blue Purple is in, despite the fact that a lot of people consider it the best deck, just because of how limited your space is and how many different strategies you're gonna have to prepare for. Like we mentioned, like to beat these aggro decks like Bello Betty, a lot of Blue Purples I've been playing like 3 to 4 Gob Threads to KO characters on curve. Just playing a lot more like cheap blockers. I've seen Chopper in their lists, more Bogwas doing stuff like that. Um, However, I've also noticed that a lot of Blue Purple players have been like trying to gravitate towards like whatchamacallit, like 9 cost Mihawk sometimes in the very, very beginning, trying to remove 7 costs if that's like something a little bit more pressing. Because aside from that, the deck doesn't have a great way to deal with 6 costs. Or maybe playing some red rocks to deal with cards like 10 cost Kuzan or doing stuff like that. Or even playing cards like 4 or 8 cost Secret Luffy to try to help against Teach and their Burgesses. There's just a lot of different like competing factors, it seemed like, from Blue Purple side, and a lot of people didn't really know what the best way to tech their Blue Purple list was for the correct meta.
Yeah.
Did you guys
speaking to
notice that
that,
issue? Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I've only played Blue Purple Luffy in OP11 basically. I was basically the entire time just trying to solve that issue of how can I make a deck that's consistently winning into every single matchup, because I think the deck has the potential to have that sort of list. I just wasn't able to find it in the end. The real thing is that I believe that or at least I believed that Blue Purple Luffy was a tier 0 deck in the meta, and that it was by far the best deck. I still believe that it's by far the best deck, but with the advent of Purple Luffy coming to the meta, it made it really, really difficult to be able to tech for every single matchup. The issue is that if you want to tech for Purple Luffy, you really want to have things like the 8-cost Katakuri, but if you want to tech for Lucci, you can't have 8-cost Katakuri in the deck. And it's this weird conundrum where your top end gets split, and you don't really want to split your top end in a deck that can't actually search out these Big Mom Pirates, for example. So before Purple Luffy really entered the meta, and I believe that matchup is about 50-50 to slightly winning for Purple Luffy, it was really easy, honestly, to be able to make a Blue-Purple Luffy deck that could kind of deal with everything in the meta, because most cards were good into most decks, with the exception of things like Gravity Blade not being very good into the mirror, but very good into things like Belvetti, which is why I didn't really like to play the card. But things like Thunder Bagua universally is just a plus 4,000 counter, so it was easy to tech into that. But once your top end starts getting split, it becomes very difficult to deck build the deck. So I think that I don't know how the start deck meta is going to be in OP11 for the West, but assuming that there's more ways to deal with Blue Purple Luffy, then it might be very, very tricky to actually build the deck correctly. I still think that if you do manage to find that right build, it is still going to be the best deck.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely noticed it, and it's one of the things that's like kind of putting me off of Blue Purple, or rather, it's like a thing that I will have to focus on solving. Because usually when you notice these like flip-flops in the list where a lot of deck spots are not standardized, usually it's a symptom of like the deck just not being able to do everything it has to do. Because a really, really strong deck, it has like this very proactive game plan where you don't really care what's on the other side of the board. You're always like playing the same cards and trying to win through them. Like Red Purple Wall was like that, Sakazuki was like that. I think Green Purple has a lot of that same feeling. And Blue Purple, it kind of does have to try to respond to other things. And that is slightly off-putting. And I think for me, the way I'm going to try to build Blue Purple Luffy in the format is to just like do my own thing every game and not really care what's on the other side. And if that's not as efficient as I would like it to be, then I will probably step away from it in favor of green purple, which I also think is really well positioned in the OP11 meta, or at least I would expect it to be. So yeah, definitely some coverage issues existing for the deck there.
100%.
Right.
Speaking of coverage issues, there's a bunch of new potential issues in these like 6 new starter decks that will exist in North America that don't exist or didn't exist in Japan back then. Are there like strategies you want to talk about first, or decks you want to talk about first that might be like very difficult for blue purple to kind of address? Hrvoje, I guess.
I mean, yeah, we can start that way. I was thinking maybe we do it just by color, but that is a good point. What people will want to be able to do is to answer blue purple Luffy as it comes down. And to me, honestly, the one that looks like most well prepared to immediately start taking on blue purple Luffy is probably Buggy. I'm not sure if you agree on that take, but to me, Buggy looks like he got a lot of tools that specifically address decks like blue purple Luffy.
Yeah, let's talk about blue purple Luffy's matchup against Buggy. So what cards did Buggy get first? Or like that are super duper appealing to you?
We just go card by card, right? Or
Yeah,
do you just want to talk about the matchup overall?
we can just talk about the SRs first, the new SRs, and then talk about the notable like rares and
All right,
commons first.
let's start with, I think, the SR that hyped more people than the other one is the Crocodile and Mihawk, which are 8 cost, 7,000 power, cross guild, and former Baroque types. On play, draw 2 cards and charge 1 card from your hand, then play up to 1 cross guild type character with cost of 4 or less from your hand. And then once per turn, if your cross guild type character would be removed from the field by your opponent's card effect, you may charge 1 card from your hand. The exciting prospect of Crocodile and Mihawk is it's another body cheat, but the first part of the effect goes body neutral, and more importantly, you get protection. Suddenly, all these cards that can completely lock away certain matchups or put you in advantageous positions. I think the Totem Buggy is like the really big one for a lot of aggro matchups. Well, now I have a way to protect it. And the stat line is relevant. Obviously, you're just going to be cheating it out with Buggy most of the time, but he is an attacker that contests the 6k leader of blue purple Luffy, which is pretty much all that matters. You just have to have enough swings to overwhelm him, and he will produce 2 bodies on the board.
Yep. I do think a notable thing about that matchup is like your 6 cost Mihawk surviving against a 9 mom. Just like making sure you have that 7k blocker to kind of invalidate your opponent's leader swing for as long as you possibly can, and being able to put in that Mihawk on an early turn and then also be able to defend it with Crocodile and Mihawk seems like a very important like tempo swing in that matchup.
Yeah. One thing about the deck is that historically, at least with the promo Buggy, it's always kind of destroyed aggro decks, not being able to let any of basically Zoro's or Bella Betty's characters attack. So I think that even within the context of obviously blue purple Luffy, that matchup probably becomes a lot better with especially this new card being able to protect Mihawk, as you said. But also being able to deal with a lot of the matchups that people bring to deal with blue purple Luffy, I think is also really significant for Buggy. This 8 cost Crocodile and a Mihawk also, I think, because it has the anti-removal effect, it mends one of the weaknesses that the deck has had in being weak to removal. Obviously, if you can't set up your board of 5 costs, then you can't actually reach your 10 cost Buggy. And this card, not just being anti-KO, but being anti-removal, is just really, really powerful into a lot of the decks in the meta.
And the other super rare we got, I think the verdict is still out on this one, but I do instinctively like it. It's the 4 cost Buggy, who is 4 Emperors and cross guild type, 1k counter, and 1000 power. And his effect is activate main, pretty important bit. He trashes himself and a card from hand to cheat out a 6 cost or less cross guild type character. And what this obviously means is Buggy finally got a really solid play on 4-Dawn, where you can start cheating out your bigger bodies like a full turn ahead of schedule, and then leverage them to basically recoup the tempo that you lose by giving away 2 cards. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this card yet. I haven't really played many Buggy games because obviously EVO2 prep, but having a proper turn to play in a deck that will ideally be able to amass hand through all the self-replacing swarm effects and Sanji's peel-offs. To me, sounds very promising. How do you feel about it, Jonas?
So personally, if I had to grade this card on like an S through like F rating, I probably would put it at like a B personally. I think the card's very powerful and it does solve a lot of its issues going second. But historically, Buggy's main constraint was just actual total resources because of using leader effect, you would discard an extra card. But at least on theory, with 8 cost Crocodile and Mihawk and 6 cost Mihawk, you do have a lot of card replacing effects that should be able to help offset this. Whether that's good enough is a different question, but I do think the combination of the 4 cost Buggy with the 8 cost Crocodile and Mihawk is probably powerful enough of a combination that it's probably going to be good.
It's tricky for me to say exactly how I would really think about the card, mainly because obviously it makes your curve going second a lot better. It works very well with the Crocodile and Mihawk, but the other cards that the start deck got are really, really usable that I don't really think that you need the Buggy. We'll obviously talk about the other cards next, but I have a feeling that obviously we talked about the hand issues that Buggy has, and also the curve issues are kind of solved by the other cards. That this card, without really good 6-cost targets, I don't really think there's that much value in. And right now we only have one good 6-cost target. I was hoping that we'd get one more. Right now it's kind of just play Mihawk or just lose all of your hand trying to play something else with Buggy. So I think it's a good card, but given that we've got 3 other cards that are 4-cost that make themselves 5-cost, I don't know how necessary it might be in the deck.
That definitely is a good point, because space is always a constraint, which honestly I rarely take into consideration when I just see the new cards and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to add all of this into the deck. Because yeah, we did get 3 4-costs and 2 of them are even 2Ks, so they're very, very natural inclusions into the deck as a whole. I would like to start with the 1K though, which is Alvida, which I think is like one of the major consistency boosts to already a very consistent deck with 8 searchers, and you can also run the stage to cycle cards. So what Alvida says, she's a 4-cost, 5,000 power, 1K counter, and on play, if your leader is Buggy, you draw 3 cards and trash 2, so immediately goes card neutral. And then if you have 2 or more characters, she has the +1 to cost clause, which is important for later developing the big Buggy.
Regarding Alvida, and I guess I kind of want to talk about this in the beginning when we're starting to talk about these cards that increase in cost, is that obviously you need to have 2 cards with the base cost of 5 or higher for this to actually become a 5-cost, but 10-cost Buggies, when he's played onto the board, immediately counts towards that count. So you actually only need 1 card that's 5-cost or higher, because once Buggy comes on the board, you now have 2, and therefore you can now use Buggy's effect. So these cards, although maybe the condition might worry some people, is actually really, really easy to use, because you're always going to be playing something like 7-cost Mihawk, or no, sorry, 7-cost Crocodile, or the 8-cost Crocodile Mihawk, or the 7-cost Buggy to be able to reach that condition and reach the five cards on board for Buggy. The actual effect of Alvida, I think, is just really insane. Obviously, it's a 5-cost 5,000 that can come out on your 4-dong turn and does a 3-draw 2 trash, which is just basically everything that Buggy wants, which means also that he probably doesn't need to run things like the stage anymore for consistency at all. The one concern I had, because I actually did test the deck into Blooper Luffy for a video that I have coming relatively soon, I believe, on my channel, is that all of his characters, because they are previously base 5-cost, are always like 5-cost 6,000, which means that they can hit into Blooper Luffy without attaching any dong. Whereas because this character is 5,000 power, it doesn't actually reach Blooper Luffy without actually attaching dong. And then later on, when you're using, like, you're playing a 5-cost and leader effect for 10-cost Buggy, or you're doing a double leader effect, you don't have that extra dong to be able to hit with Alvida. So it is kind of just enabling your leader effect, but never actually becomes an attacker in this matchup, where you do need a lot of small attacks to actually be able to break through the fact that Blooper Luffy draws 2 cards per turn.
Yeah, that could be very, very, very annoying. Just like your 5K bodies being invalidated for a little too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't really have a timing to attach dong on that deck, but I still think that the other cards are very powerful, so we'll have to see how it ends up doing as a whole. But obviously the 2Ks that it got are very, very significant too, because some decks,
I think the biggest swing with that you're looking as Buggy in the matchup is to just drop the 10 cost, because once you do, once you achieve that against Blue Purple Luffy, like, he has a very, very short timer to to actually play on the game. So you just have to manage until then, which these 2Ks do help you do in both when they are on hand and on the board, as they share the same clause as Alvida, except they also become blockers if you have 2 5-cost or more crossguild characters. Kabaji is a 4-cost 1K, or rather, they're both 4-cost 1K power characters with 2000 counter. And what Kabaji says is, on opponent's turn, he has plus 5000 power. So when he actually does become a blocker, he's effectively the 4-cost Borsalino for blocking purposes only, but attached on a 2K, which is, I guess, more reminiscent of the chopper we have seen in OP10, I think is the red chopper. And I guess I can just go over the Moji as well because they're such similar cards. Besides becoming the blocker, he doesn't gain any stats, but on KO, he draws 1 card if your leader is Buggy, I think. And you have 3 or less cards in
And
your
you have
hand.
3
Okay.
cards. Yeah.
Okay, that is actually a big condition that makes him significantly worse than I remember, but it's still like better than nothing on a card that's going to be a blocker to help you look out endgames or at worst K, and just a 2K. So yeah, it makes sense that they have very similar effects, being the Moji and Kabaji pair. Overall, I think just good 2Ks are always great to have. And
I was very
2Ks
impressed with the Moji blocker when I was testing with it earlier. The extra resource is like very, very important just being able to survive. And then blocking when you go to like 3 or 2 life when your opponent's be able to race you down is like basically all you ever want to do.
Yeah, and you're really only blocking after you've already set up your board anyways, and I feel like by that time you've been using your leader effect a lot, you've been countering a lot, so your hand does start to get a lot smaller, so it's not difficult to use the effect. I do really like the draw over the plus 5K because I feel like you don't really want to be resting your board as a Buggy when the opponent has the opportunity to take it back. So Kabaji, maybe not as great as Molji, but obviously just them being 2K blockers that can be played on 4-dong but become 5-cost. I think just in general, this is really, really good for the deck.
all right, and that does cover the new cards from the Buggy Starter deck. And yeah, I think how it reflects in the matchup against Blue Purple Luffy is mainly that your ability to place enough 5-costs on the board becomes much more consistent, which once again matters. So that you drop your big body that basically wins the game on, like, not on the spot, but it makes it so easy when you have a body that Blue Purple can't really contest without just red rocking it, and that big body of yours also has the red rock attached to it. So for that reason, I think Buggy should fare quite well into Blue Purple Luffy. And am I missing something, or are you guys kind of in the same boat?
One concern is I'm not entirely sure if Buggy is that great at applying pressure during the developmental turns of the game. Like the deck really wants to prioritize just using leader effect, maybe getting a poke in if you're lucky, going second. But a lot of the time, your Buggy opponent's just going to be at 2 life, if not 3 life, up until they like kind of curve out. So I'm just not entirely sure if you can compete with like racing them with these 7K bodies if they're still so high and they draw like a couple Sanjis. That's like my main concern is whether you can keep up with those multiple 9K bodies. But if the pressure is able to translate very well and the 12 drops kind of like a closer, I think that's like definitely going to be good enough.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm worried about too, is that Buggy doesn't really attack that much in the early game. He just doesn't want to rest his board, and he doesn't really have the extra dong to be able to attach to his leader oftentimes. So it ends up creating a situation where both of the decks get to the late game safely, and Blue Purple Luffy getting to late game safely entails that he has something like 8 cards in his hand, 8-cost Katakuri, 9-cost Sanji, and another thing on the board, and it just is very, very scary to deal with if Blue Purple Luffy can curve out perfectly. But that's the same for every single deck. I don't know if Buggy has an astoundingly winning matchup into Blue Purple Luffy because of that fact. But I definitely think that if he can find ways to weave in poke or be able to consistently get to that late game where he can start slamming down 10-cost Buggies, he has the card draw and consistency to be able to do that every single time. So if that one game plan is really good to Blue Purple Luffy, then we might see a significant shift in the meta.
So any other strategies you guys want to talk about next that are kind of supported by these starter decks? I've been personally trying Purple Black Luffy a lot, and I've been really excited about that deck. You guys want to jump into that next? If that's cool with you guys?
Yep, sure.
Awesome.
Okay,
Yeah, I
good.
can just leave this one to be easier.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah, so Purple Black Luffy kind of anecdotally has always been like this weird like Moria deck in the past before the card got banned as like a way to just get a bunch of card advantage and just like try to play like the best purple cards basically while like getting extra card advantage with black cards. But I never thought that strategy was particularly insane. But this purple black starter deck that's coming out next week definitely has a card that almost single-handedly changes how I think this deck's going to be played, and that's the new 6-drop Monkey v Luffy. This card's a 6-cost 7k Straw Hat. And it has on play when attacking, Dawn -2. If your leader's multicolored and your opponent has 5 or more Dawn cards on the field, your Straw Hat crew type leader now has a base power of 7k until the end of your opponent's next turn. I think this leader effect, we've seen a lot of leaders in the past become 7k leaders. Even in OP11, we have like Blue Yellow Nami. But in a Straw Hat leader where the Dawn -2 effect is like mostly negligible due to the blue purple black Luffy effect, I think this card helps this deck become one of the most powerful racing decks that this deck's ever seen. It's kind of like one step faster than or bigger than Newgate. And as much as like blue purple likes to bully with its 6k swings, we kind of get to flip that dynamic on its head, becoming a 7k leader and kind of barraging them with multiple swings. Have you guys been experimenting with this card? Hrvoje, have you like really liked the 6-cost Luffy in general?
Yeah, so I have been a fan of that card, not just in black purple. I've also kind of been enjoying it in green purple as well. I think the card just has general potential in at least those two leaders, but obviously black purple is what it was designed for. And yeah, I mean, just the level of accessibility the effect has in black purple is, I mean, it's obscene. Like before, these leader buffing effects were usually tied to something very resource intensive, such as the Three Brothers kids transforming into a card from life, where you lose a card from hand, you lose a card from life. That's actually like worth 3 to 4 cards, but you get it through power on your leader, or you had just something big like Newgate, where you have to spend your full turn to buff your leader, and then this at a very cheap price in a deck that naturally wants to ramp, like makes your leader 7k repeatedly for basically not even a cost, because you get the one active Dawn back, and yeah, it just turns very oppressive very quickly. It's something that people, I think, as soon as they play against it, they will realize that, hey, this guy's just hitting me for 7k, 8k every turn, and I cannot really hit him back because, first of all, like that's such a huge base power. There's not many decks that spam out many bodies in that range, and then he also has access to Gum Gum Giant because he is a form of purple Luffy. So yeah, this card, I think the only thing that somewhat keeps it in check is that you cannot ramp into it going first and already use the ability, because that would be just levels of regression, which it would just be uncomfortable, because the deck can also run all the hand rip deck like Forco's Blocker and Isha. So yeah, quite excited for this card to try it both in black purple more and in green purple.
Yeah. If the opponent ramps though on their 4-dong turn becomes 5-dong, then you can use the effect ramping right into your 5-dong turn going first. So in a way it hurts these decks like blue purple Luffy, all of the Luffys basically besides green purple Luffy even more. So definitely going to be looking at the deck as one of the premier like anti-Luffy Luffys, which purple Luffy kind of used, or sorry, green purple Luffy used to kind of take that spot. Regarding this card, I think that people's first instinct when they see this card is that it's a very defensive card. People see things like Frankie within the deck, they see things like the 7-cost Sanji, and think about ways that they can take the opponent's board very efficiently while being a 7k. But all of these cards are actually really good aggressive cards, thanks to the leader effect being able to give you back active Dong, and obviously Sanji, instead of hitting the board, you just hit the opponent's leader, for example. Blue purple Luffy, or sorry, not blue purple Luffy. Purple black Luffy has a lot of really aggressive tools that are kind of disguised as defensive tools. So I think that I don't know if it's going to end up being a really hyper aggressive deck, but I kind of enjoy playing the deck as a very aggressive rush to 10-cost Nika, get onto the board fast. And although 10-cost Nika and 6-cost Luffy don't really work well together, you could think of 6-cost Luffy as a way to either regain stability after you've played 10-cost Nika, or a way to reach your 10 cost Nika stably. And I think that these two cards, although they don't necessarily work well together, just the deck theme of these being very aggressive cards that don't really let the opponent back into the game, really, really interesting for the deck. And I think it solves one of the issues that Purple Black Luffy has always had, in that it's a 4-life leader, which means that you can't really, you don't really have enough time to really get into the game, so you always had to go for these aggressive plans. So very excited for the card. I think it opens up a lot of deck building potential for the aggro and control version of Purple Black Luffy, so we'll have to see kind of what people can end up cooking up.
Speaking of consistency being an issue with Purple Black Luffy, the other SR does help solve the other issue that I've noticed with Purple Black existing before, which was consistency. The other card is a 3-cost Nico Robin. It's a 3-cost 4K that's a 2K counter. And the effect says on play Dawn -2. Add up to 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and set it as active. So in this deck, this is a baseline in Purple Black. You get to Dawn -2, gain 1 Dawn back, and then use or kind of proc your leader effect and gain 2 Dawn. So similarly to the 3-cost Zoro that was printed in OP09, this deck now has another 3-cost play that helps it ramp from 3 to 6. And additionally, being a 2K, this card really helps make sure that Purple Black Luffy gets to put in 6 costs before basically anyone else can even have a chance to breathe. I'm really glad this card was printed. I think it's like almost an auto staple in this deck. Kai, what are your thoughts on the new Nico Robin?
I think it's insane. Whatever, I play Purple Black Luffy kind of on the side for fun inside events and whatnot. And the deck, when it does or doesn't have the 3-cost Zoro, is really, really significant. Just being able to have that 3-cost 5,000 that ramps and also lets you hit for 7k on the first turn was just really powerful. And just being able to have more copies of that Zoro and solving the issue of having too many cards with no counter in the deck is just really, really good for the deck. So very excited for the card. I think that it helps Purple Black Luffy as a deck concept even more than the 6-cost Luffy, although 6-cost Luffy is going to be a lot more noticeable.
It's a 2K consistency piece. I love this type of stuff. Obviously, there was Black Maria before, but the fact that you did everything end of turn meant you couldn't like get the cost protection, you couldn't like get your buffed up attack. Robin just solves that you get everything right now, and it's like immediate include at 4 copies just because it fits your natural game plan so well. And she, for her, really like solid effect compared to Zoro. She only loses 1k of power but gains 2k of counter, which honestly they really pushed it with this one. But if I can just go back to the topic of 6-cost Luffy, because I remember something pretty important. The way that he works in this deck, how I imagine it will work, is he's going to be quite the pivotal card. I think in the same sense that Sanji Pudding is to green purple, where a lot of matchups for other decks against black purple are going to be based on how well they can answer this Luffy just coming down at some point. And yes, black purple Luffy leader has the +1 cost when he has Dawn attached, but a lot of decks like that try to outstuff with cost kind of has some adaptations to Sanji Pudding getting buffed up by stage, like Uchi can just play the Kuzan and then Kuzan swing, leader swing, play Robuchi or whatever, and pop it. But also, namely, there are the red decks with like Mulgans, which hit the 7k power, or the Divine Departure, which insta-kill this, or Newgate in Marco to like kill a 7k. So I do think there will be a lot of focus on like answering this card, and that focus already exists in the meta because of the presence of green purple Luffy. So I think some obstacles for the deck are already in place, and we'll kind of have to see how that dynamic plays out in the meta.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why I kind of thought that... Oh, is it okay?
Go ahead. You're good.
Yeah. It's kind of why I thought that maybe the deck should kind of revolve around 10-cost Nika still, is because the card, the deck when it plays around 6-cost Luffy is very, very powerful, but I do think that there's a lot of ways to answer the deck, and if it's your only game plan, then you're going to really struggle once the opponent clears it. Blue-purple Luffy actually significantly can't deal with the 6-cost Luffy when there's a Dawn leader because it becomes 7-cost, so therefore 9-mom can't get rid of it. But it's just a matter of being able to tech in things like the 9-cost Mikahawk again to be able to deal with it, and green-purple Luffy at the same time.
Like I mentioned, I do think that Blue Purple Luffy kind of has a natural issue with this card, with the exception of 9-cost Mihawk, because it dodges both 9-mom and Gravity Blade. I would argue that the difference between trying to deal with Sanji Pudding and trying to deal with this Luffy is about timing and about when it's being played. Um, I do think that this Luffy is a must answer kind of on the spot. And additionally, I think that the fact that you get to ramp into this effect and it makes it a little bit harder to remove compared to Sanji Pudding, can kind of be a little bit more obnoxious. And having a built-in effect like stage with a +1 cost is definitely a huge merit. Um, and lastly, I think that the fact that you still get the +2k, it kind of persists throughout, even if the 6 cost Luffy is dealt with for a turn, can definitely be a huge damper in the like these aggro decks trying to remove it or Lucci trying to remove your characters. So um I mean, I'm a huge fan of this deck. I'm obviously very biased about it, but I do think it has some potential, and I do think, despite the fact that it has limitations with like red removal and like black removal, I do think it's still very, very powerful. And even when it's being removed, it still has a very lasting impact on the game. Awesome. Personally, I don't really think that many of the other cards from the purple black starter deck are particularly interesting. Is there anything you guys want to talk about from this thing that might be useful in this upcoming meta?
So there's one more thing that I want to talk about in Black Maria, not Black Maria, Robin.
Okay.
It's I've kind of messed around with deck building, but I haven't really found something that in my mind at least, I'm convinced would actually be nice. But Blue Purple Luffy's always had this really fun thing that it could do if you run the 3-cost Zorojuro, the OP05 one, not the OP05 Zoro, where if you ramp with Zoro on your 4-dong turn, you get 2-dong back, so you have 3-dong left. You could play Zorojuro, which means that you can basically double ramp on your 4-dong turn, which means that on the next turn, assuming that you hit with the Zorojuro to get another active dong, then you can play an 8-cost. And then in OP11, we get a really strong 8-cost in things like the 8-cost Katakuri. So this could really lean the deck more into a control-ish kind of board creating style, kind of like Purple Luffy in a way, which I think could be interesting. Maybe people mess around with that just because that combo has become a lot more a lot more consistent. So just one more thing to kind of experiment with for people listening. Yeah. For the new cards, I don't really think any of them are great, but I do think that Soba Mask is a very nice teach counter, which I think is pretty significant if there's going to be a lot of teach.
Yeah, just for people listening, Soba Mask is a 7-cost 9k Straw Hat with no counter. And it says if you have a Sangoro or a Sanji character with 7k base power or more, this card has -5 cost from hand. And then the on play says return all of your Sangoros or Sanji characters to your owner's hand. Um, so I imagine you want to kind of put this in play for relatively cheap against Teach for as little as 2 Dawn, and then kind of put a bunch of like 9Ks in and not have to worry about like leader effects or on plays.
Yeah, I think that obviously there's going to be use cases in other matchups. People have been talking about being able to spam loop 9-cost Sanji in Blue Purple Luffy. I don't necessarily think that that's very good. People are also talking about how you can play the 7-cost Sanji and then be able to play a 9-cost on the same turn, so that effectively you kind of leave your 7-cost Sanji active and enable a bigger attack the next turn. But I think that the card not having counter doesn't do enough to the boards immediately. That like unless you're a leader like just historically cards leaders that can cycle through their deck like Sakazuki, this card just becomes a brick in your hand. And unless it's a really teach dominant meta, I don't necessarily see the card being a significant factor to the purple black Luffy deck or any of the purple Luffy or purple decks in general.
Yeah, I also pretty much view it as a trap, mainly because end of the day, it's like a vanilla without a counter, and you need that specific scenario where Teach turns off your own plays and you have a Sanji target, which there's not a lot of Sanji targets for this card to make good use of it and have a really cheap body come out. Otherwise, if you're just playing it over some regular Sanji, you end up paying like the fair price for it, like even if you do it with the vanilla. So you're basically paying the fair price over 2 turns, and you're power bumping your unit on the board, but the unit you're bumping is already like strong enough to contest opposing leaders. So you're kind of like overkilling it at a very large opportunity cost of having a non-counter in your deck and in your hand. But there is another card I'm like sort of on the fence about, and it's the Chopper Blocker, the 3-cost 4k with 1000 counter, and non-play he can -2 Dawn to arrest the opposing Dawn, which is an effect we have only seen in purple on one other card previously, which was the Windsmoke Judge. And I think that effect has like some niche value. If this guy was a 2K, I think he would be played in like pretty much every Straw Hat deck, but without it, he's like a very situational end game finisher, which it's real difficult to evaluate. Like the fact that he's blocker does give him like some leverage to actually be playable, but he's also like the worst blocker stat line. Like 3 cost 4K is my least favorite like genre or of blockers or whatever, just because it's like not really enough to attack, especially coming into a meta where we expect 6K, 7K base leaders. But it's also like strong enough that you feel bad blocking with it in some positions where, because this could be presenting a relevant threat for attacking. But the fact that he has a potential game-winning effect, it does have some appeal.
Yeah, I think significantly, a lot of the purple decks historically to deal with Gum Gum Giant, they've either just had to push through and hope that the opponent either doesn't have it or pushes through the Gum Gum Giant, or for the case of Blue Purple Luffy, play Pudding. But Pudding, of course, costs 5. And this card, if you play it in Purple Black Luffy, basically costs 2 because you get the active Dong back from your leader effect. So it is a way to be able to get rid of at least 4,000 of the opponent's counter in these sorts of mirror matchups, which I do believe are going to be relevant. I don't know if you'll end up playing it because the stat line is a bit big for the cost, and just being a blocker in these other matchups might not be significant enough, but maybe if you have the space, it could be good. What do you think, Yonas?
Yeah, personally, I just didn't feel like resting Dawn was that necessary. In the games that I've played, it felt really narrow to kind of play towards this card, just because naturally throughout the course of the game, when your opponent's willing to leave out only one Dawn, with the potential threat of a card like this, they usually have enough counter to barely survive anyways. And later in the game, if they're worried about this card, they'll just leave out multiple Dawn. So the fact that this card exists will put extra pressure on your opponent to kind of figure out trying to figure out how to use their counter correctly and their events. But in general, these kind of effects never really interested me, even though it's on a pretty decent blocker.
Yeah, I mean, slight counterpoint is that I think that this card isn't strong enough for people to actually really factor it into deck building. So I think that if people end up running it, it'll be one of those things kind of like historically with green, where like, for example, 8 Kid's strong when people aren't expecting 8 Kid. I feel like if people put in a card like this, which honestly I do kind of doubt they will, but if it becomes the norm to put in a card like this, then people will play around it, and then it becomes weaker, so people take it out. But if people aren't playing around it, which is going to most likely be how most people are going to be playing the game, then the opponent usually will probably only leave up one Dong, in which case this effect could be kind of significant. It's just that there's too many cards in the game to really play around effectively that people probably won't factor this card in, which makes it a little bit more powerful than it might seem.
That's true.
Not to say that the card's great though, but
yeah,
it does
no,
have
but it's a good
some
point
use case.
about when the card pool gets so massive, it's really hard to play around everything and anything. So this card will definitely catch a lot of people off guard, and almost probably solo games just by existing.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, it is just a blocker, so it's not the worst at the end of the day.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kai, you briefly mentioned Blackbeard. Do you kind of want to talk about the new Blackbeard cards that have come out? There's a couple
Yeah,
new
I think Hrvoje was about
SRs.
to say something.
Oh, sorry, Hrvoje. Yeah.
Oh, I want to take it in the direction of Yamato, but
Oh, let's go to Yamato.
everyone's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Just to
let's go
Yamato.
Yamato.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I think
So,
I guess right before we finish Purple Black Luffy, there is one more Frankie. Very quickly, it's like an 8 cost 10,000 that has some sort of condition that makes the opponent's character, or 2 of the opponent's characters on the board minus 2,000 power. I personally think it's just worse than the 6 cost Brook that already exists within the deck and or within the card pool, but not even being used in the deck. So, not really something to consider for me. Do you guys have any sort of brief thoughts on that card?
I thought this card was good.
No, there's like 2 cards which already do the same, and they're both Brooks. So it's like this guy's way too big for what he does, and unless the big body itself matters, where you want this 10k to contest blue purple, I don't see a reason to include it, and I don't think that will be the case. So
Yeah. If it had Rush, like the 7-cost ace, that would have been nice, but
This card would be insane
right now,
if it
not
had
really.
Rush.
It does tell you how ahead of its time 7-cost ace was, though. Like,
It's crazy, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I'm very underwhelmed with this card. I think there are better ways to try to deal with relatively large threats with cards like Gamma Knife or 6-cost Brook. And if you want to try to get rid of multiple characters, I think purple decks generally don't really need this effect. But in general, 6-cost Brook is just going to be like far and away a lot better. Or even Bone Kichi from like OP05 might just be a better card.
Yeah. Sorry to lean on this point for too long, but when you mentioned 7-cost ace being ahead of its time, I remembered that I actually saw something on TV, which is still a thing in Japan. People still watch TV. That they kind of showed a behind the scenes in development. They're talking about the early effects of the game, and 7-cost ace originally in development was a 7-cost 9,000 rush on play, give your opponent's entire board minus 10,000. So good thing that didn't make it to the game.
Okay, I mean,
yeah. I'm not sure if that card's beatable. Period.
Yeah, no. But I guess that's how they design cards: make everything broken and take away power from there. But
that is a good principle, to be fair.
Yeah, a little bit ahead of its time, let's say.
Yeah, like okay.
Would you like to take us to Yamato?
On that bombshell, yeah, we can, I think, move on to a leader I'm excited about, despite having pretty much no experience with it previously, which is the Yamato starter deck. I think one of the two non-4 emperors that we are getting here. Obviously talking about the green-yellow Yamato. And the first super she got is one of those things they do recently, which I'm not the biggest fan of, where they make searchers super rares. So we have Yamato, who is 1 cost, 0 power, 1000 counter, and on play she searches 5 cards for a land of 1 card with cost 2 or more. And when she has 2 down attached, she gains 3000 power. So naturally, with the Yamato's leader effect, she becomes a 5k as long as you can do that thing for free, because your opponent has a 3 or less life, which in Yamato is relatively easy to guarantee, because you can do the double attack swing, and if it goes through, it's live. And to me, this is like a pretty solid addition to what Yamato has. She didn't lack searchers previously, but more never hurt. Like Momonosuke and Otama is 8, now we have 12 if you want to fit them all in. But this is also a searcher that can turn aggressive at the flip of a switch, and they kind of have to answer it if they don't want to get chipped away. Of course, under the condition they're a 5k leader and you don't have to attach more Dawn, but you can attach more Dawn. It's like a 5k attacker basically. So yeah, I'm quite pleased to see this card. I'm not sure it was deserving of a super rare slot though. What do you think, Kai?
No, that's fair. I think that the effect on its own is very nice. Just being able to have, because effectively this is kind of a 1 cost 3000 searcher. Because once you attach 2 long, it hits for 5000. Compared to the other searchers that are the 1 cost 2000 searchers that you need to attach 3 dong to hit with. So it kind of occupies the same niche that the other sort of searchers do, because you only hit with them when you attach 2 dong or 3 dong to hit with them anyways. The one concern that I have is that, for me at least, my perception of Yamato is kind of unclear because I don't really play the deck. But the deck, I feel, has always kind of been a kind of good stuff deck where it doesn't really use searchers and just plays what it draws and just tries to draw really well into Hody. And I don't necessarily know if the deck really revolves around Wano. So I think that if you do want to utilize this card, and it is a pretty nice addition to the deck, it might force you to kind of put in some weaker Wano cards to make the deck more complete. Obviously, we have gotten some of those Wano cards, but it'll be interesting to see how people actually end up building the deck with this new card, because right now I don't think people are really playing around that package.
I agree with your point about having to kind of redesign what the Yamato deck looks like, just because to use this card, you're not need to add a lot more Yamato or Wano cards to your deck. However, I do think this is a very convenient target for 5-cost Momo to gain the life back from before. Being able to get that cheap 5k swing in while also gaining an extra life is a relatively useful thing that the Momo searcher that you had to rest wasn't able to kind of fulfill. So this kind of I knew that card was a really powerful card that needed a much more powerful core than when it was printed a couple sets back. So I'm really interested to see if you can make this 1-cost searcher work with that 5-cost Momo.
Yeah, sorry. Even when Hrvoje was talking about the card, it didn't really register me that was a really good combo. So that's quite nice, actually.
You
to
just
kind
have
of
the
have
Atama as well, though, like the 2K, which I think you will usually prefer. But this is like more targets also for if you run the You Can Be My Samurai. I'm not sure.
To be fair, sorry. Like the Otama was only green cards, and that was a really big constraint from before.
And
I
also,
only
is the
played her in
Momonosuke...
Peronos, I never noticed.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah. No, it only gets green cards, which is something. Does the Momonosuke put away any mono card, or does it have to be a yellow mono card?
I think it's any named Momo.
I see. Okay, anything not named... Okay, that's why I couldn't get rid of my 1-cost Momonosuke. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. I was remembering I can send the 1-cost Momo, but... Yeah.
Speaking of Momo, he's the number 2 super rare. He's a 6-cost 7K without a counter and yellow. All the new cards in this dual color deck are yellow. And during your turn, if you have 2 or less life cards, your leader gains 1000 power. So during your turn only, a bit odd because it doesn't work on the defensive end. And then activate main once per turn. You can kind of reattach, you can. This is the first time we have this effect in the game. You take the dons which are attached to something, and then you like unattach them, but they are still rested. And then he gains rush on 1K. So he's effectively a 6/8 rusher if you have 2 don attached somewhere on the board. And honestly, I didn't think too much about this. Like my gut instinct was I don't like this card because I have some difficulty imagining the sequencing involved in where this is actually 6/8 rush, because you cannot do it on curve, I think. Or no, you can do it by just playing him and then attaching to something, and then he unattaches and gets the rush, which I feel like is a very convoluted way to do it, but yeah, it's a bit of an odd design process.
Is it activate main or on play?
It's activate main.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. I thought it was on play.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that'd be a lot worse.
Yeah, no, I thought it was on play, so I was like, this is terrible, but no, it's not bad, actually. Yeah.
It only really is exceptional when you have another character to already attach Don with your leader effect. Like having a 1-cost Yamato and having 2 or less life means you can play this card, use leader effect attached to swing 5, and then give this rush and then swing 7. So it does require you to have a relatively aggressive board and curving out, but it is a very powerful tool.
You could just pressure also blue purple Luffy with the 8K attack on that first turn, and then I think this deck in general, all theory, I've never tested the matchup. As I said, I haven't tested Yamato much, but this Yamato could be one of those decks that just kind of try and bully blue purple Luffy at the same pace that Betty tries to do. Maybe not as strong, but if there's decks I'm expecting to be able to beat blue purple Luffy, this is one of the first I'm actually looking towards, just because of how fast it can be, and it also on the back of Hrvoje Jones, it can rest like so many defensive resources so quickly. But Hrvoje Jones is another card that contests this very slot on the curve. Like Momo can come down on 6, and that might be his saving grace. But yeah, I think this card has some aggressive potential, but I'm not sure if it will be needed. Like Hrvoje Jones exists and he's broken.
He is broken. It's kind of difficult to really rate the deck as a whole, because OP11 without the start decks, the Yamato matchup is very winning for blue purple Luffy, because 9-cost Mom's just a stupid card, where Yamato's really powerful when the opponent's at 2 life or higher, or at 0 life, and the opponent keep having the ability to keep putting themselves back to 1 life makes it hard for Yamato to actually break through, unless he has, or she, or he, I guess, has multiple Hodies, for example. So with the new start decks, maybe having more copies of Hrvoje in a way with a little bit more balance, not being able to rest the opponent's Dome or characters, might be nice to just have a more aggressive board that Yamato really has only had through Hrvoje. But we'll have to see really how that ends up playing out.
I do think Yamato in the past really felt very limited in what it could do, mostly just because its threats, aside from Hody were relatively lackluster. There were moments in time people played card like Holly with the Sky Island package. People played five cost Ace from the starter deck 13. People just try to figure out some way to kind of make sure that this deck had a bunch of extra attacks. I do think this is probably the best one we've had as like a mid-range threat that isn't going to kind of like break your own back like Hody Jones would. So I'm hoping this can kind of help bridge that gap in the middle part of the game and really make this deck a lot more explosive, especially when it's not going first, which is its like a general preferred strategy. So excited to see how that goes.
Yeah. Yamato did get a few more cards, and I think the one most people have been, or the people have been most excited about, is actually a common, the 3-cost Ashura Doji. He's 3,000 power, 1,000 counter, and on play, if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, he KOs a 5-cost base character, and yeah, the fact that he ignores cost increases and just straight up KOs a 5-cost, being a 3-cost character. I mean, that feels like power creep, I want to say, but we also had this effect on Zeus without the base cost targeting. So I'm not sure where it sits exactly, but the fact is 3-cost 3k, as irrelevant of a stat line as it may be, it still like synergizes with Yamato's leader effect to become a 5k. So yeah, this seems like a very, very powerful removal tool for Yamato to control the mid game, and I would expect it to be a core card. Am I overhyping it?
Just the fact that it's a 1k and it's not necessarily playing into Yamato's aggressive game plan, although obviously being able to clear the opponent's blocker, for example, is very nice. I'm not exactly sure how I rate the card exactly, but given that, although we mentioned Zeus is a 2k, making it really easy to put into every deck. So we'll have to end up seeing, obviously, being able to reach Green Purple Luffy's 5-cost Sanjin pudding, despite them being able to increase the cost of it, is very nice for the deck. But I can't really see an avenue, aside from actually, as we were mentioning, the 5-cost Momonosuke being able to play a more slower game with Yamato, that you might not necessarily want this at 4 in the aggressive variant of Yamato, but I could be wrong on that.
No, I forgot to mention it's leader to Land of One leader, so I think it's only Yamato and the old yellow Yamato, like from starter
The
6 or something.
yeah.
Starter 9, I don't remember.
So I like building bad decks, and this probably might be underpowered, but when I saw this card, the first thing I thought it was actually OP11 5-cost law. Because compared to a card like Zeus, this is actually a really good way to kind of repeatedly get rid of 5 costs while also getting a reasonable amount of card advantage, especially like repeatedly bouncing this or like bouncing searchers to your hand and KOing 5 costs in the same turn. That kind of strategy seems very, very interesting to me. It might not be good enough just because like only being able to deal with 5 costs in a format of like blue purple is probably not going to be sufficient. But that kind of core just seems really interesting to me against a deck that's like predominantly 5 costs. Like this against like green purple getting rid of Sanji puddings seems like a very, very interesting strategy.
Yeah, that's true. If you look at the decks that aren't blue purple Luffy and like the decks like Bella Betty, Zoro, purple black Luffy's, his cards are 6 costs, so not really great there. But decent card in general. The 1k, just when compared to Zeus, I'm still not exactly sold on yet.
Yeah, fair. I think the other 1k does fit Yamato's strategy a bit more, and it is the new Izo. So he's a 2-cost, 1,000 power, 1,000 counter character, Land of One of former Vibrant Pirates. And with 2 don't attached, he becomes a blocker. But more importantly, on play, your Land of One type leader gains Banish. So you now have a searchable Onami. A less flexible Onami, it only grants Banish to the leader. No, it cannot give it to characters, but you do now have the ability to like search out and immediately threaten like double attack Banish, which is like the bane of a lot of decks, especially the ones that like to stick to the very offensive curve where they just spend all done on developing. So this card, it feels like it raises the power ceiling, but I'm not sure how many copies you dedicate to it. Like, is this something you want to consistently see on the curve? You guys have obviously played the deck a lot more than me, so how are you interpreting this card, Yonas?
Personally, I think this is one of the most cohesive tools to like the default like Fortress Yamato strategy we saw a little bit in like OP06. Just because some people or some decks that are playing Yamato like to strategize around denying their opponent's resources as much as possible. And a lot of what that looks like is just repeatedly barraging your opponent with like banish 7, 9k swings and just denying your opponent cards. And that's a really, really powerful strategy when your plan with the rest of the game is just blockering up with cards like 8 cost Kid. And this card both being the kind of Onami replacement to kind of like make sure that you kind of make sure you get these banish swings to either make your opponent counter with 2+ cards, or make them make sure they don't have resources while going super low, while also being a blocker in the late game to kind of defend their 8 cost kids. Kind of does the best of both worlds. So if that's the strategy that might be reasonable in the upcoming sets, I think that's a very, very powerful tool to kind of do everything this deck wants to do, basically.
I think it's a very nice card, honestly, because it kind of plays into both styles, where you can play the slower Fortress Yamato and you can also play the more aggressive Yamato, and you're not forced to really tech into one in deck building by playing this card. I don't know if recent Yamato lists still run the 2-cost Onami. I imagine that they do, but I feel like it's one of those cards that people misuse very often, where they play it like as soon as possible to try to get, if they're going first, like a banish, double attack banish 8k on their 5 turn. And while this is strong, I feel like a lot of times the stronger move is to kind of annoy the opponent with lower level attacks and then hit them with a double attack banish when they're low on cards because they've been over countering from the early game. So I think that just having a searchable Onami, basically, although it doesn't have trigger, has blocker, I think is a lot better than Onami. So I think if you do want to go for that plan, very nice, but really it's hard to tell without knowing how people are going to end up building the deck.
I completely forgot about Fortress. That the fact that it can double like as both a starve tool and a blocker for Kid, yeah, definitely raise it a bit in my eyes. But yeah, it's something I'll have to test. Like I plan to test all the starters. I assume you guys do as well. So yeah, I think this card it should pan out okay. Like it just reads good on paper. And for the last card from the Yamato starter deck, it's the least impressive one. It's the new Kinemon. He's 4 cost, 5000 power, 2k counter, which is like I want to say the premium 2k counter stat line. But he has no base effect. He only has a trigger. If your leader has Land of Wano and your opponent has 3 or less life cards, you get to play it. And like it's the Kiku Nojo closer, or like all the previous Akaze 9 yellow Land of Wano characters had this type of trigger. I think it was Kiku Nojo, Nekomamushi, and there was also like the spiky hair guy, Denjiro, on 5 cost. And this adds to that lineup while being probably the most forgiving slot to include in the deck because it has no effect, but it's a 2k. Like it's kind of free to include in the deck, and it might just be a very free body. Like I see it as a basically better Satori, which I think some Yamato lists were running anyways, just to have that pop out of life to pressure the opponent further type of thing. And now this is just that, but it's searchable as a 2k and just fits the deck better because you can also combo it with the 5-cost Momo as well to just put the 2k back in life, and then you can decide if you want to draw it again or if you're just going to play it out again. So yeah, I think it's like a solid addition, just a 2k, but is there something I'm missing here?
I think that obviously if you play towards the Wano style, you are going to end up putting in some of those cards, especially like Nekomamushi, or I think it's called Cat Viper in English, because it's a 1k 4/5 with a decent effect. I think that maybe also Dogstorm has a similar effect, or Inuarashi. And if you are putting in more of these Wano cards that just trigger onto the board, it also makes your Momo stronger because you have more targets for your leader effect before you use the Momo activate main. The 6-cost Momo from the start deck, that is. But yeah, it's just a decent 2k for the deck, and being searchable is nice as well. So nothing you can really complain about, but it's nothing to write home about either.
Personally, I think this card is exactly as you guys described it, but I think that having a better 2k than Satori that doesn't require an extra resource and isn't conditional to being low life like a card like Kikunojo or like 4-cost Frankie that sometimes people play, the Egghead one, is just a lot better compared to what we had before. And I think that does increase the explosive potential of Yamato by a fair margin, to be completely honest. But
Hmm.
as to whether this deck makes it broken, no. But I do think all those nickel and diming those extra cards with a deck as aggressive, leading as Yamato, is really, really important.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, all of the cards in tandem, I think none of them really give Yamato like a new way to play the game, like for example the 6-cost Luffy did for Purple Black Luffy, but all of them just kind of increase the ways that she's kind of wanted to play the game universally. So I think that it's a good start deck for her. So it's really going to be how people can end up building her and how well that does into the meta.
So
Yeah. Which color do you guys want to go to next? I think we have.
Jonas had some
Sorry if
segue
there's
into Teach, so I think if you want to
oh
start.
yeah, we could jump into Teach then. Kai previously mentioned like how prevalent Teach might be, despite the fact that it's actually been pretty reasonable in the current OP11 format, as a main way to beat like Lucci. But we kind of got a couple new cards here that either change a lot of what this deck strategy is going to look like, or really help solidify it.
By the way, now that we've got into Teach, hold on. So OP12 came out yesterday at the time of recording this, and every set I open up exactly one box because I'm always disappointed by that one box, and I don't feel like I want to gamble more. But my one box yesterday.
Oh wait,
Holy, that's gorgeous.
that's like the
Yeah,
Giga
it's the
Wait,
I don't know,
it's not the
the
SP, right?
manga star.
It's like the silver Luffy that we have in OP11.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
it's like 100,000 yen or something. So
Holy fuck.
need to go sell that
Jesus.
later.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah, and the funny thing is, I also pulled the Teach leader in OP9 in my one box. But I don't really play Teach that much. I haven't really gotten around to the deck, and it's always been the thing where like it feels like it should fall out of the meta, but it ends up kind of barely sneaking into the meta. So we kind of talk about that, I guess.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me put this away.
It's a
I think it's
gatekeeper
so
deck.
gorgeous.
Like it always loses to the best deck, but it just beats so much stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So going into that next color and the next strategy that was printed in the suite of starter decks is Blackbeard. Kai briefly mentioned this deck being a pretty decent like anti-Lucci counter in the previous OP11 format, or in the pre-ban list and even post-ban list format. But with the starter decks, we kind of get extra buffs for this deck, so it might end up being an even more powerful competitor. The first card, which kind of turned my head a lot, is the SR7 cost Teach. Is a 7 cost 8k Martial D Teach. It's both a Yonko and a Blackbeard pirate. Activate main, rest this character, KO up to one character that costs 3 or less. And on KO, add up to one black card from your trash to your hand. For me, when I read this card, I was just like, why does Blackbeard now kind of have a searchable Jack? And also, I thought that this might help build this deck or transition this deck to be less of a 10 cost Teach deck and maybe more of just a KO focused deck, just to have this really obnoxious body that can help KO bodies every turn. What are your guys' thoughts on this? I think this is pretty solid, but I'm not entirely sure if it's good enough compared to the 10 drop Teach plan. But I really want to experiment with the KO stuff for the most part, basically. What are your thoughts, Hrvoje?
Okay, so first of all, I did at some point tweet my ratings of cards from new starters, and I did put this one number 5. That was a bit of a what's the word for it? Engagement bait. But yeah, I don't know. This card is weird for me because it was never the way I like enjoyed playing Teach, because it feels like you're doing the Lucci thing but without being Lucci, and you rely on a lot of separate pieces falling together. Namely, with this Jack, with not Jack, with this Teach, it would be the 5-cost Augur as your main cost reduction tool, and obviously you can run Laboon. But that's not the plan that has generally worked for Teach since I want to say OP09, like late OP09 when they were playing Jack and Tempest kicks. At least that was popularized in Europe by Zixo when he won the Treasure Cup with it. And yeah, I generally just didn't see that build do that well or get popular because in some ways it's the harder way to play Teach, because there's a lot more like threats to assess and things to calculate on when you can give up that card for leader ability and what it's going to cost you if you don't. And now we're in a meta where this idea of turning your entire board sideways to remove a character on your opponent's board it gets punished by one green card by a very popular meta deck, which is just Electrical Luna. They slam it, they hit you, and suddenly like you're probably losing the game the turn after. So for this particular meta, I'm not sure if I like Teach, because he does have two very powerful attacks stacked. It's like Jack that floats, but he doesn't have that extra protection that Jack himself has. Because for example, even against Lucci, like they can just leader swing Tempest and they play their own Jack and they kill the Teach. And he will recur something, but they have this big high cost guy that you cannot remove with like normal effects. You need like Augur Black Hole or something. So I'm not too hot on this card right now, but obviously if there's ever a time where I think Augur builds and removal builds are dominating, this card should be like straight fire.
Yeah, I think you hit on it really well. I think that one of the big strengths of Jack is that he isn't a 7 cost 8,000, but he's an 11 cost 8,000. And the fact that this card is just a 7 cost means that it's going to be targeted by the things that are targeting Sanji Pudding plus stage. It's going to be hit by any sort of power reduction because it rests itself, which is the same for Jack, to be fair. It'll also be hit by Electrical Luna. So I feel like it has a lot more weaknesses, but the significance of the card is that it is searchable. So it is kind of a give and take. The consistency being is great for Teach because he has the stage, obviously being able to search for this card if he really wants it. So therefore, he doesn't need to run that many copies of it like he did for Jack. I think it's a decent tool. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the focus of the deck unless you really tech your deck for that. One thing about this, though, that is kind of different from Jack, aside from the on-KO effect and the +4 cost, is that you don't have to target the opponent's characters. You can KO your own characters, which is pretty interesting at the very least. If the opponent decides to do something like ignoring your Van Augur, then you can just activate the effect for a 1-draw, or not Van Augur, sorry, Duck You, for example. In these sorts of matchups, maybe it could be significant. Even, I guess, I don't know how useful it's going to be, but Pizarro is one of the new cards that we're probably going to talk about soon, is another card that on KO gives you a card draw. So Teach being able to KO your own characters, while maybe not very significant in a lot of cases, does give you a little bit more options. I think that's quite nice for the deck and very fitting for Teach.
Yep. In testing, the thing that's come up most with the self KO has actually been 6 cost liberation. The song and dance that your opponent has to do with making sure that you or the Blackbeard player has 2 or fewer characters than their opponent can sometimes be very easily kind of solved with just like 7 cost Newgate KOing my own Doc Q or my own Lafitte, and just kind of making sure that I can get that KO on like a pesky 6 cost character, like 6 cost Secret Luffy or stuff like that. So that's come up a fair amount, and I think it's a really interesting combination of cards. But yeah, it's a pretty niche interaction. I think it's a pretty fun one to think about still.
Actually,
yeah, just having that option, I guess. Yeah.
It addresses one of the things I did want to mention as its criticism. The problem of the remove focus build is that you are kind of stepping away from such power that lies in liberation when you run, I would say, the more aggressive, more racy build where you're just slamming down Burgess, Shiryu, and then all the small blockers like the Vivis and the Vascos, and then you transition into tank quests. If you focus on removal, you're kind of sticking the board for a while, and then resolving liberation becomes difficult. But yeah, Jack KOing your own stuff does potentially enable liberation quite easily. So yeah, that is a good point. Might not be as niche as you're trying to sell it as.
That is fair. We've talked a lot about the KO strategy of Blackbeard, but I do think that the other SR really helps facilitate the rushing Burgess strategy that Hrvoje was talking about with like Burgess and Shiryu, and that is the new 6 cost Kuzan. So this card is a 6 cost 6k blocker with 1k counter. And its on KO effect says play up to 1 Blackbeard Pirate type character card with a cost of 5 or less from your trash invested. When I saw this card, I thought this card was a really powerful both way to slow the game down while also making sure that the Blackbeard deck can just enact its game plan very well. Bringing back Burgess, obviously, as like a blocking and putting in an 8k plus character for free is just going to be a very, very powerful interaction. But even when trying to make the game more about resources, using the 6 cost Kuzan to bring back like 5 cost Kuzan to further keep drawing cards and amassing resources just seemed like a really powerful effect. And it's been like relatively reasonable against decks that can't really remove the 6 cost character very well. Kai, have you played this Kuzan? What are your thoughts on this guy? Do you think he's worth it in this like Burgess focused builds? What are your first impressions?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's crazy. Like the issue, I think that 5 cost Kuzan's an insane card, but the issue is always that you do have to pay 5 dong to play this character onto the board. Usually, most of the time, you end up just using the activate main immediately just to be able to play something from your trash and just get the 1 draw. But this character being a blocker and also doesn't really have the weaknesses of the other decks, where you have to worry about things like 9 Mom getting rid of it because you just turn off the opponent's on play effects, means that most of the time it does get its effect of, and being able to play the 5-cost Kuzang multiple times just gives you so many resources in this deck that's currency is basically resources. So just having more ways to play the 5-cost Kuzang onto the board consistently, and that 5-cost Kuzang enabling you to play either more Burgess for this aggressive plan or more Van Augur for the control-y plan, really just sets up a lot of interesting things for the deck, and all you need to do is just have 1 Kuzang in your trash because you just keep recurring it.
For me, also the main appeal is just being so card efficient, because yeah, Blackbeard, every card counts, and I haven't tested with the card yet, but yeah, in theory, the amount of card value gained just by having this block revive 5 plus Kuzan at an opportune timing, of course, so that your opponent cannot swing into the rest at 5k is quite crazy, and then it also reduces the need, or like it's a mix with one of the other new cards where you reduce the need for taking something like Devon, because you have like other 6k blocker options, and this one can, like, on a flip of a dime, you effectively have a trigger to bring out Burgess, who is now huge and can attack immediately next turn because he's likely not being dealt with on the board. But yeah, the fact that you can save cards through mid game, while by the fact that he blocks, he already saves you 1 card, so it's kind of like you already drew 1 card there, and then he revives Kuzan, who's going to draw you another card, and then you just spawn 2 cards out of thin air, and you still got your Burgess on the board. And yeah, there's just kind of math that goes crazy and potentially breaks these mid-range types of decks. So I do quite like Kuzan on paper. How it will work in practice, I'll have to see later.
Yep. And despite the fact that we're all really hyped on him, I have noticed a few kind of issues with him. One is the card is actually quite bad if your opponent makes it difficult to use this character. So, for example, a lot of things that can happen against like blue purple is if you have the 6k blocker, your opponent can just choose to just like poke relatively small first while leaving their characters active. And now you can no longer just like block the 6k swing and then like, or block like a Katakuri swing and then just like defend the Kuzan. If they start with their leader swing, then you no longer can just bring back a Kuzan for free because they can just swing 8 at it and kind of like get rid of all that value. So your opponents can play this weird song and dance of making sure you can't use that character for as long as possible, and kind of having this like Kuzan or this Burgess on layaway can sometimes feel like a liability in terms of slowing the game down. It's a small thing that's come up a couple times, but it's not like a card that people can't mess around with in combat at the very least.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a new OP11 card that came out. What's his name again?
The Caribou?
The mud guy. The 2k blocker. Oh Karibu. Yeah, Karibu. Yeah. Karibu is an OP11 card, which is a 1-cost 2000 2k counter with blocker, but on play you have to trash 2 cards. But obviously in Teach you can't use on play effects, so it's basically just 1-cost 2000 2k blocker. And this has been one of the biggest additions to the deck in OP11 in Japan before the start decks. So being able to play these really cheap blocks to the board does kind of solve some of the issues with Kuzang, where it helps defend your board a little bit better, but it does feel kind of counterintuitive to have to block with your 6-cost Kuzan before your 1-cost Karibu. But that option does still exist, I guess.
Yep. Let's talk about some of these other cards that we briefly mentioned. We've kind of briefly talked about Pizarro as a relatively decent like early play that will help facilitate some sort of aggro play with Blackbeard. Pizarro is a 1-cost 1k with 1k counter, obviously a Blackbeard pirate, and he has activate main once per turn. You may rest one of your full lead cards, your Hachinosus. If your leader has Blackbeard pirates type, this character gets +4 1000 during this turn, and on KO draw a card. So this is effectively a way to turn your stage into enabling a 1-cost 5k attacker. You can't really enable multiple of them, but it's still a relatively cheap attacker for 1 mana or 1 Dawn. I'm not entirely sure if this is the game plan I want to have with Blackbeard. I'm much more a fan of just like being relatively controlling in terms of attritioning resources. But swinging 5 every turn is a very obnoxious threat if you don't need your stage to filter your hand. Hrvoje, what are your thoughts on Pizarro? I know that one person you work with, Flash, really likes this card, but I'm curious on your thoughts.
Wait, really? Okay, I did
I
not
think he
know that.
mentioned it in a video or in a
Yeah.
tweet the other day.
Yeah,
Interesting.
he mentioned that he thinks that the card's crazy. But yeah.
Wait, did I think the card is crazy?
No. Fletch.
Oh, okay. No, I see some funk to it, but the problem is the stages where I think I would like to use this type of effect the most are also the stages of the game where I would like to use the stage. Why I really overuse that word. Where I would like to use full the most as well, just to find all the pieces necessary to like have a smooth game plan. And of course, you can just attach Dawn to it to make it as relevant of an attacker as it needs to be for a very low price. But this is a type of card where, yeah, it's a 1k, but I start having concerns about deck space. Because can you really afford, like, what problem for the deck does the 1-cost 5k attacker solve, is the question. And I don't think I see the answer, but I'm not the most experienced each player, so.
Yeah, my biggest issue with the card is that if you want to play towards this aggressive style, it also means that you want to make your Burgess as big as possible. And one of the means of doing that is dumping cards into your trash through the stage. So it's a weird card. I don't really like it that much because it kind of takes away from what is already a very powerful teach strategy. Also takes away some of the consistency for just one 5k attack. So I don't like it that much, but maybe Fletch will figure something out for us.
Agree. Let's talk about the other 2 cards that are pretty reasonable. One card I think is quite good. I want to try to find space for it, but I'm not entirely sure if it's worth it. Is the 4-cost San Juan Wolf. It is a 4-cost 6k that says if your leader has Blackbeard Pirates, this character gains blocker and has +1 cost for every 4 cards in your trash. On play, you trash a card from your hand, which isn't going to matter when you're playing Blackbeard. And this card also has 1k power. I thought this was a really useful card to play on 4 Dawn as a way to kind of invalidate a lot of your opponent's early 5k swings. I'm not entirely sure the format's about early 5k swings, if that's what's something that really matters. But this body seemed like a relatively great way to like beat decks that are just going to be swinging a bunch of 5s or 6s and making this blocker relatively annoying for your opponent to get through. But at the same time, it's competing for Burgess on 4, so I'm not entirely sure if it's going to end up being worth it. Kai, what are your thoughts on San Juan Wolf? Do you think it's worth playing in Blackbeard? Do you think it's a bit too slow?
I don't know. The thing is, we just got a 6k blocker, so I don't necessarily know if we really have the space for it, especially because there are other things that you want to be doing on those turns, especially if you're going first. You also have the option to play 5-cost Kuzan on the same turn. You have Van Augur. It really only competes for what you play on the 4-dong turn, which a lot of the times in a lot of against a lot of decks, you don't necessarily even play Burgess. And at that point, the card's still going to be a 4-cost. It doesn't actually increase in cost. It makes it more difficult for the opponent to clear. So it's something that you play in the late game, but the late game you're playing 10 cost each. So although I think it's a really powerful card in a lot of ways, I think that just in terms of the plan of the deck, you don't really have a good timing to play it throughout the game, except for maybe the last turn when you don't have 10 costs each.
To me, this was the card that read the best on paper, but I did like cool off on it a little bit in the time since. So the main thing that appeals to me with the deck, and this especially becomes prominent in the Teach Mirror, is you kind of have to have these 4 costs to play the game. And if you don't have Burgess, you're fine dropping Shiryu and using them to like contest Mirror until you reach 10 costs. And this is just like more tools in that toolbox. But then the problem arises, how does this compete against... I don't think it competes with Burgess because like Burgess is something you always run if you see it, and if it's good to drop, you will drop it. Like if it's really big, really early, you just drop the Burgess and you have the 4/8 vanilla or whatever. But the question is, like Shiryu and this are both like very defense-oriented cards, except this has a more relevant stat line. Like Shiryu is harder to kill in defense, but to attack he actually needs some low investment. And this is 6k by nature, so it can like contest 6k leaders. But by being a blocker, it's like better defensively against decks which don't play relevant 3-drops. And I feel like there's some room for that. It probably doesn't deserve many deck slots, but I can see it like stealing away some of Shiryu's spots. But there's also this caveat that I've seen Blackbeards in EBO2 with the meta changes cut down Shiryu's either like some number or all of them. So maybe there's just no room for extra 4 costs in the near future. But on paper, I like this card the most because I think these like 4 cost 6k units with good effects, and this is like 4 cost 6k blocker with counter. That's like the dream unit. But yeah, the meta might not suit it. On paper, though, I think this is an insane type of card.
I forgot that the West is playing Shiryu, because in the East, I don't think I've ever seen anyone play that card against me and teach. So given the context of Shiryu, it definitely seems better than that. But for the Japanese builds, I don't even know what's really different from the Japanese and Western builds. But in Japan, we don't use Shiryu, so maybe by that extension, we might not need that much of this card. I definitely think that regardless, despite what I said before, it does kind of deserve maybe 1 to 2 spots, because you can just filter your deck to find it throughout. But there are a lot of other relevant cards that you do want to play on those turns as well.
Yep, I would agree with all the main points. One small thing is in the late game, bring a relatively annoying blocker that you can bring back with 5 cost Kuzan is actually quite useful. But you wouldn't be able to bring back even like a Vasco shot, but that's like a significantly worse in a lot of spots. So that might end up making it like good enough to play as a 1 or 2 of. And lastly is another Blackbeard 2K and Devon, Category to Devon. Just really quickly, it's a 1 cost 1k power, 2k counter. Activate main, you may trash this character. If your leader is Blackbeard, give 1 character -1 cost, and then on KO draw a card. Importantly, activating this, the activate main effect does not let you trigger the on KO effect. So this is kind of a way to like be -1 cost for 1 Don in this deck. This didn't seem better than stronger in any capacity, but if you need more Blackbeard 2Ks, it seemed like a fine one to play 1 or 2 of if you need it. What are your thoughts, Hrvoje?
Oh, did the Discord just throw a thumbs down emote because I did what? I've never seen that. But I hate this card. I genuinely like, unless you need the searchable 2k, I don't see the space for this. Like, Stronger is a good card. I think Shiryu 2k is also a good card because he is the only card that can win some bricky game states by just trying to dig. Like, it sucks to play him, but the games where you have to play him are the games that he's like the card is going to increase your win rate the most in the 2k slot. And then there's the new addition Karibo. So I don't see why would this ever get a spot in the deck. I'm just very disappointed in the card.
Yeah, if there's certain thresholds that you need to reach, then this card can help you reach that in the more control-focused version over a card like Shiryu. But I mean, the deck has decent 2Ks already. I don't necessarily think that it needs it, and the activate main and the on KO effect being a bit counterintuitive is something to consider as well.
Yeah, those are the main Blackbeard cards. I do think it has a lot of promise. And within the context of the meta, I'm not entirely sure if the Burgess strategy will be like the best strategy. It's kind of what I'm leaning towards, just like 4 cost or 6 cost Kuzan, really like Burgess leaning. But the more that blue purple Luffy will bring cards like Gravity Blade or 8 cost Luffy, God forbid, as ways to kind of get rid of Burgesses, the worse Blackbeard's going to feel. So even still, despite all of these tools, I'm not entirely sure it could beat a well-equipped blue-purple deck. So it's going to be kind of hard to see how the format is going to shake out with this deck.
We have two more colors to go over, but we've also been going on for a very long time, so we might want to kind of go through because I think that the last remaining decks we have Shanks and Bonney, and I think that they have some decent cards, but they're maybe not as significant in the general public's eye in terms
yeah,
of
we can just
how
talk about the
much stronger the
SRs and
cards
that's about
actually
it
get.
then.
Yeah, sounds good. Or any cards that you want to bring up, we can talk about those as well.
Sounds good.
All right, we have been moving sort of in the backwards direction with the decks we have been covering, so I think we might as well go to Bonney before Shanks, just because, yeah, green is after red, so we'll just do it reverse. Bonney got some interesting cards, notably the super rare is once again a searcher, which again surprises me as a design decision, but it's Kid and Killer, Supernovas and Kid Pirates. 2 cost 2000 power, and it has a 1k counter. On play, you'll get top 5 cards, and you can add Supernova. And then when the opponent attacks, you can trash the card, and you can trash Kid and Killer to reactivate one of your Dawn, which I think is meant to be synergy specifically with Bonney Leader's ability, as it's in the starter deck. But it does open up some interesting lines in other Supernova decks where now you can maybe surprise your opponent with some events. I think it's a very cool type of design that we haven't really seen much of in this game, where you have this like face-up trap card and you're going to use it eventually, but when is the real question. So I really like this card. I like it more, honestly, for its potential for green yellow law, now that he finally has a good 2-drop in the deck. But it's actually, I'm not sure if it's going to be that good for Bonney, but it does open up options. How do you guys feel about it, Yonas?
I'm personally only really interested in this card in law decks, just because it solves the supernova searching issue that existed ever since OP01, where aside from exactly one cost Bonney searcher from the original starter deck, this deck didn't really have many ways to find some of the powerful supernovas, and this is like a great way to do so. But I'm not entirely sure if those decks are going to be exceptionally powerful in this upcoming format. That's about it for it. I'm not entirely interested in the last effect. I think it's just fine. But I do think that there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. I'm just not really excited to use that for anything aside from Bonney Leader effect, which is just exactly okay. I think.
Radical Beam in red and Room in yellow. Well,
Oh, sure.
maybe.
Those are reasonable, I think. But very contextual, I think.
I think the card's pretty interesting. I'm not sure if it's necessarily exceptionally powerful like some of the other cards that we've seen, but I think that it opens up a lot of interesting playmaking because it always has the threat of being able to restand one dong, so Bonney can just use all of her dong at the end of her turns, and a lot of the turns you just leave up a dong to make the opponent feel a bit scared of the dong, but not actually really need to use it. And just having this card on the board that can at any point give you the dong means that you're not necessarily wasting your turn by leaving up an extra dong at the end of the turn to present that threat. The card being on the board just presents that threat automatically. But one thing that I think is pretty significant is that this is a very specific anti-Hody card, because if they play Hody to rest your dong, and then you use the effect, you still get your dong back. So it's not bad there. Also taking you to OP12, we have a new card, which is in English, something like Dead Man's Something, which is basically Hody, but on an event. It also counters that. So an interesting card in that prospect. Very good in Green Yellow Law. Green Yellow Law, I think, at the beginning of OP11 was kind of popular in Japan, and this deck kind of fell off due to the other matchups, I believe, but it had a decent Blue Purple Luffy matchup. So it's an option, honestly, I think, just given that fact. Yeah.
Right. The other super is, I think, a boss monster not many people expected to see in a Bonney deck. It is Law and Beppo. And they have the on-play of you can rest one of your opponent's characters, and they will also not become active during the next beginning of turn. And then if your opponent has 2 or more rested characters, your leader becomes base 7000. And to me, or against plus 2000, I don't think the difference matters that much. The idea is, of course, you will easily get 2 rested characters on the opponent's board because you get one through this effect and one you got with Bonney Leader the turn before. But my question is, like, what does this card accomplish for Bonney? Because traditionally, when Bonney decks wanted to like buff up their leader, they would like place 8-cost Kid on the board and hide behind it. And that was just the MO for all the green decks when they want to like stall out the game. And the upside of buffing your leader is, of course, there's no removal effect that can reduce the leader. There's very few effects which can reduce leader's power. But you already had this like such an elegant solution to this problem of hiding behind a bigger leader. And do you really need this card in the first place? What do you think, Kai?
I think that the card's good because I'll say but first of all, but I think that the card is decent just because Bonnie's never really had sort of proactive cards on the board. If she wants to be proactive on the board, she has to play the 9-cost Zoro or the 8-cost Kid, but 8-cost Kid is kind of a proactive defensive card. She's never really had these proactive offensive cards aside from the 9-cost Zoro, although that card is really, really strong. So I think this card being able to just take out one of the opponent's active characters from the game for one turn is quite nice. I don't necessarily think the +2K is that significant because of the timing that it actually comes online. But in tandem with things like the Kid and Killer being able to give you 1 dong or Hrvoje being able to give you 1 dong, it makes the deck a little bit more tanky, so I can see it there. I just don't know if you'd actually end up running it over the other options that already exist.
Yep. Me personally, I think this card would be very, very good if I could rest one thing and stun another. Where like one thing I could rest a blocker and make sure like another top end body would not be able to restand. Just being a little bit more flexible. But as it is right now, it kind of functions as like a relatively bad carrot a lot of the time with like slightly better like defensive tools, which is mostly a testament to how busted carrot is. But I think this card just doesn't really do much compared to cards like 10 cost del Flamingo, which can stun the game for, or stun your opponent's entire board or multiple pieces of the board. Or cards like 9 cost Shanks will get rid of a threat like immediately. So I'm not a huge fan of this card. I think there's just better ways to do everything it wants to do, whether that's making your leader bigger with 8-cost Kid, which is a turn faster, or like neutralizing scary threats with either 10-cost Luffy or Shanks. It's kind of like the worst of multiple different axes, but it kind of does all those things at the very least. So
yeah,
there is that merit.
The card kind of just clashes with itself because you are buffing your leader to make it more difficult to attack, but then you're also like preemptively removing your opponent's attack options, so you're not even fully maximizing the use of that 2K bonus.
Yeah, I guess one kind of... Oh, is that okay?
No, go ahead.
Okay. One slightly significant thing, I guess, about this card is that in the context of Blue Purple Luffy specifically, Blue Purple Luffy has a very balanced card called 8-cost Katakuri, and this card being able to restand your board makes it so that the opponent can't use 10-cost Flamingo very well, if at all, because your 9 moms are also being restood. So in that context, this card being able to kind of eliminate 8-cost Katakuri from the board temporarily is nice, but it's only in this context, I think.
Yeah, if it got rid of the Katakuri for more than the 1 turn, I'd be more interested. But it like stuns the Katakuri, and then the turn after, at the end of their opponent's next turn, it just restands itself. So
It
it's
just
kind of
restands
like,
again.
yeah, like damn, that's unfortunate. But yeah, I do think that stunning Katakuri is very nice, and Shankar's Dofi just doesn't do anything against that card. So I do think that's a really important note to talk about.
All right, there's a few more comments. We'll just cover them quickly because I don't think they're actually that notable. They're just plays on what we had before. The first is Capone Gang Bege. He's 2-cost 1000 power, 1000 counter, has a blocker, and on play if you have 6 or more rested on, you draw a card and discard a card. And this filtering effect on a supernova blocker we have had already with Bartolomeo in OP6, OP7, I don't remember exactly. And Bartolomeo you could kind of preload. You can play him on 3, and then later on when you play Kid or something, or some resting effect, you get to draw and discard. And this only works in those later stages when you're already playing big cards and stuff. So I kind of see this card as a worse Bartolomeo, especially less efficient in the sense that it can never be a relevant attacker, and you're not like getting the full use out of playing him out with Kid. So yeah, you guys got anything notable to add about the big game maybe?
Not really.
I mean, yeah, but Green Bonney is a deck that's historically had a lot of bricks in the deck because she needs to play a lot of cards to account for a lot of different decks. Having filtering is nice. I don't know if I would rate it worse than Bartolomeo, because Bartolomeo's effect is kind of difficult to, or the condition is difficult to activate within Bonney without other cards. So it might be a bit easier to use, and also it being a 2-cost is a bit more flexible to play on the board and not off of Kid. So I think there's some merit to the card. I do think that it might be run in the deck at a couple of copies just to help fix the hand issues that Bonney tends to have. But I mean, it's just decent, I guess.
Yeah, and the last two cards are 2Ks with similar effects. The first one, the weaker one, I think, is Basil Hawkins, 4 cost 4K, 2000 counter, and end of your turn you set one of your dons as active. So it's basically an emergency Rouge if you want to develop a 4 cost body, which I'm not sure why you would want to do it when it's not really going to be relevant as an attacker. But another way to look at it is as like the bigger version of the 5 cost carrot we got like way back in OP2 or something. But this time it's Supernova and Hawkins Pirates, so it's searchable. Do you think this card will earn a spot in the Bonney list?
Not at all. I do think the other 2K is a lot better, personally.
Yeah.
But this card, I think, just fails comparison to like EB X-Drake or X-Drake Apu.
Apu, yeah.
So yeah. I wouldn't really want to play this type of card. And if I want ways to restand Dawn, I think there's a lot of more powerful like 1K counters that could be playing, like a Rouge that we talked about, like Cavendish, or even Fight Off Smoker as a brick, that are just going to be doing this effect a lot better with a relevant stat line.
Yeah,
and I mean, one thing to point out, sorry, is that
sorry, I was wanting
Bonney...
to go into X-Drake, so you just say it.
But one thing to point out is that Bonney still runs the the start deck 2 Apu. There really just aren't very good Supernova 2Ks in the deck. So just having anything, just even a card with a decent stat line, regardless of the effect, could be nice for the deck. So you might end up running it just because of all the other options being terrible, but maybe not because we have an actually decent 2K.
Yeah, and that is X-Drake. He's 5 cost 5000, 2K obviously, and his types are Supernova, Navy, and Drake Pirates. The Navy part might be relevant in some color hybrids, maybe like Blue Green. And his effect is on play. But his effect is Supernova locked. If your leader has a Supernova type, rest up to one of your opponents, cost 5 or less characters, and then end of your turn you restand one of your Dawn. So it's not like a continuous effect where you are going to get a Dawn back every turn, but it is an additional like optional curve to start starving your opponent. And I think where this will manifest the most is like, we know which color Bonney struggles against the most. It's like the black removal of Uluchi, where they set up a Kuzan, set up a Laboon, and this is already a way to start taxing those cards from black decks. And obviously, it's naturally going to be good against aggro decks as well, which are trying to build a board and then push into Bonney, without doing the thing where they just don't attack, so you cannot rest something with the leader ability. And this like kind of lets you bypass that by proactively resting their stuff and attacking into it and taking away resources. So I think this one is quite a good card.
Yep, I'm very excited about this 2K personally. It's just better than the 2-cost Apu that Kai's already talked about. So I'm glad to kind of like replace my default green 2Ks with Tashigi, the EB Apu, and now this one as like slots 9 through 12.
Yeah, honestly, nothing you could really complain about. It's maybe slightly worse when compared to Usahachi on the final turns, but being able to use it in the early game is quite significant, as Hrvoje has been saying. So, not a bad card. I definitely think it fits into the deck because all of the other Supernova 2Ks are terrible. So I'm glad that they're kind of fixing that issue.
So yeah, let's jump into the last color.
The
color, the deck that people probably have the least hype about. But there are some decent cards, is the new Shanks starter deck. And the main card that they printed that I think that a lot of people have compared to OP02 Newgate, but in a relatively negative light, is a 9-cost Shanks. This card is a 9-cost 10K that says if your opponent has a character with 8,000 base power or more, give this card in your hand -3 cost. Then the on-play says if your leader has Red Hair Pirates or is Uta, your leader gains plus 2,000 power into the end of your opponent's next end phase. So similar to Beppo and Law, this is another way to buff your leader. Now with Shanks as a 7k leader, and this is at the bare minimum a 9-cost Newgate, but has the potential to make your leader a 7k for the low cost of 6 Dawn. I think this card's not bad, but doesn't work in the Shanks core. What are your guys' thoughts on this guy? How about you, Kai?
It's an interesting card, I think, because Shanks right now, the reason why he's not in the OP11 meta is because he's very weak against decks that kind of do something similar to him, but ramp, where Red Purple Luffy, Blue Purple Luffy, these decks that can ramp and then play big characters before Shanks tend to outpace Shanks in the long run. So against these decks specifically, Shanks can play this card on curve, I believe. And against Purple Luffy being able to play Katsukatakuri or Blue Purple Luffy being able to play any of his fun cards at the top end, being able to maintain pressure on board and also the character being 10,000 power is very good within these matchups. And because these matchups are probably going to be quite prevalent in OP11, I actually don't think that this card's that bad. But against the other matchups, it's not very great. And Shanks doesn't really have ways to cycle his deck. So if he doesn't have ways to get rid of it in his hands in these matchups, then it might not be good enough. But I do think that if you do want to make the Blue Purple Luffy or Purple Luffy matchups better for Shanks, I think this is the card to do it. So I don't think that it's as bad as people are really saying.
For me, it's a very simple thing. I see a brick, and in Shanks that presents a lot of problems because the bricks you run are quite high impact when they drop, and this one trades a lot of like the real curve power for the imaginary, if stuff lines up, curve power. Because if you drop him ahead of curve, like he's just insane. Like if you're a purple Luffy opponent, like went 147 and then on 7 plays Luffy Taro, and you slam this, and you're like feeling so good. You have a 10k dude, you're 7k, you're just gonna absorb so many swings at this early stage of the game. But if you're just playing this late in the game when your opponent already has like a board of potential like 9k, 10k bodies, and you're just playing a guy that makes your leader 7k, you're not really gaining that much. And I mean, that's why Shanks hasn't. I don't think I've seen a single Shanks ever run the 9-cost Newgate, which it's not searchable, but let's be real, a lot of Shanks builds throughout the OP9, OP10 did not run any searchers. Like they would just, draw the good cards. And that's how the deck worked. And now this is a searchable one. Also works in Nuta, I guess. But it kind of does work on the promise that in the meta there is going to be enough decks strong against you because they ramp ahead and put stuff ahead of the curve. But you also struggle against them, and you need this card, and it's not going to be too much of a sacrifice in all the other matchups. So I think in some meta that's way more focused on these types of decks, this card can be solid just because you're countering the meta. Otherwise, though, I just see a brick, and I'm not sure if it deserves the space.
I mean, if there is a meta where this card is good, it is the upcoming one with Blue Purple Luffy and Purple Luffy as the main focus of the meta. But as a 9-cost, it's pretty terrible. As a 6-cost, it seems really nice to me.
I would agree. One thing that I'm thinking about when using this card is that it's quite hard to use in conjunction with other cards in the deck. Shanks, as it's built right now, is just play your big guy on curve. And even when you make this card into a 6-cost on your like 8-9 down turn, there isn't much you can do with that extra Dawn aside from swinging bigger. So if Shanks had other tools to make your turns better when you make this card cheaper, that might make this card a little bit better, and that might make this card like more playable moving forward. Thankfully, the other SR for Shanks does combo with playing this 10-cost Shanks, and that's the new 6-cost Uta. It is a 6-cost 4k body with 2k counter. And the character says, if you have a character of 10k power or more, give this card in your hand -4 cost, and it's just a blocker. So if you have the Shanks in play, it is a 2-cost blocker that's also a 2k counter. Unfortunately, this card isn't searchable by the 1-cost Uta that most Shanks flex play, but does like making yourself a 7k leader while also playing 1 or 2 of these blockers make Shanks interesting enough for you, or is it just like feel not worth it in general for you guys? What are your thoughts, Hrvoje?
I'm so perplexed by this card just because it's so oddly statted, and I really thought for a while, where could you run this? and the Shanks was not in my list. Like, you have searchable 2Ks that have like relevant game-ending effects, and you already have like an unsearchable blocker that's a 2K, and it's going to be useful more often than this because, as you said, like this specifically combos with the new Shanks because he has those Dom left over. If you're playing a 10 drop, you cannot play this, and stuff like Chopper you can play on earlier turns or whatever. But the Chopper you can also play alongside the Shanks when his cost is reduced to 6. So yeah, the only deck I could really think where this would make some sense was perhaps a red purple Luffy, because after you do the gear 5 turn and you have this limited amount of Dawn, you do have the body to just play this out as a reduced cost blocker to ensure survival. And I guess maybe red purple Uta because she also ramps to big guys, but I have zero experience with that, like sugar red purple Uta. So I'm not too thrilled about this card, honestly.
For me, it's very awkward. As you said, Red Purple Luffy was the only deck that really came to mind as one that can really use this card well. But it also already has the 6 cost Sanji, which on the 10 cost Nika turn, although it costs 3, is a 6,000 power character. And also it's a Straw Hat, so it's searchable. There's like being a 2 cost is nice, and also if you don't do 10 cost Nika, just after you play 9 cost Luffy, being able to play this card for 2 cost at any point is okay because 6 cost Sanji couldn't be used in that way. But I think that just because 6 cost Sanji already is in the deck, it might feel a bit redundant. So I just don't know really where you'd want this. The art's nice though.
Can confirm. Yeah, I am of the opinion that it's also not particularly great in the Shanks core at the very least, but it might have homes in other spots, but we'll find out soon. As for the other 3 cards, let's talk about the card that's the most similar to cards we've seen before, which is the 1 cost Yasop. 1 cost Yasop is a 1K with 1K counter and has the effect activate main once per turn, giving up to 1 rested Dawn to your leader or one of your characters. So similar to 1 cost promo Koala or the OP11 starter deck starter Nami, Shanks now has a 1 cost character that can attach Dawn to make it into a 6K attacker. Does this help enough against these 6K leaders to help Shanks kind of attrition these decks out of resources? Or does this not fit into Shanks' strategy in general? What are your thoughts, Kai?
If it's nicely, if you're going first and you play Yes Up into Beckman, like you can do you could get the minus 1,000 power from Yes Ups on attack effect, and then also Beckman to KO or trash a 7,000 power, which is nice. Other than that, it is kind of just to increase your leader's power most of the time, and I don't necessarily think that Shanks really is looking to do that in most cases. So I don't think it's really worth the spot, but it is kind of a feel-good card maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you will really fit this onto the curve. I think these type of effects usually have the problem that since they're activate main, you kind of, we're in a game where on plays do all the heavy lifting. So usually by the time you would want to use this effect to enable some powerful on play, you already had to play the character to have the rested on in the first place. So yeah, just not for me a very thrilling type of card. And I think there's a reason pretty much none of the archetypes that have cards like this have played it, because Whitebeard Pirates also have the Haruta, which yeah.
Yeah, actually, I didn't. Right, yeah, it doesn't work with the 5 cost Yes Up into Beckman. So it's kind of terrible then. Oop.
Yeah. You gotta say it in so many words, but you're not wrong. Let's talk about the other card.
Edit it out.
No, keep it in.
Yeah.
The next card that people talked about that sparked a little bit of controversy online is the 4 cost Ben Beckman. Ben Beckman is a 4 cost 5K with 1K counter. Obviously a red hair pirate, and the card has on play, you may trash 1 card from your hand. If your leader has the red hair pirates type, KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with 4K base power or less. Personally, for me, this card seemed almost irrelevant going into this upcoming meta. At best, it's KOing cards like 4K Zorojuro, and I don't really know much other reason why you'd want a card like this, where it would even compete with cards like Lucky Roo or stuff like that. Do you think this card is even worth playing in a deck like Shanks? What role do you think this card would have in an upcoming meta, Hrvoje?
I mean, I read this card and I just thought that this is trash. Like nobody's ever gonna play this. But then it did spark some debate online, and I'm not sure. I think people misread the effect. That's my only
Mm.
only guess. Like if I'm giving a full extra card to remove something, yeah, I don't know. I might be willing to give like Otama to have an effective Marco or pre-play white, not white snake, building snake to also combine with Marco, but I don't know. This is just so expensive for on a very mediocre body. I don't think it ever gets played.
It only reaching 4K and base power means it doesn't even synergize with the other power reduction in the deck. But I just think like it feels like even in OP01 it might not have been played because of the general stat lines that people were playing back then. It just seems like a really weird card for me. I think it's honestly kind of terrible.
4K is
Glad
a
we're on the
fake
same
stat
page.
line. Like it doesn't exist. Not
Yeah.
on
You're
good
not
cards
wrong.
at least. Like
Lastly, we have a kind of new effect at the very least. In the one cost Monkey D Luffy, it's a one cost 2K with 1K counter with activate main. You rest one of your Dawn cards and this character and give one of your opponent's characters minus 1K power during this turn. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I really like these kinds of effects, because I think minus 1K that's repeatable, or at least forces your opponent to attack into the body, is a very powerful effect. However, I think that resting one of your Dawn is a little too costly of an additional cost, especially when decks like Shanks or other removal based effects or base decks really just want to play their 8 cost Rayleighs or the 7 cost New Gaze or stuff like that without having to kind of say use an extra Dawn. And usually that extra Dawn's better used in a card like Building Snake or Otama, like we talked about before. But maybe this card being repeatable or at the very least soaking in an attack might be worth it. What are your thoughts on this card, Kai?
I mean, Red Force exists. So
That's true.
like like obviously you don't have the merit of it being 1K or the opponent hitting into it, but I don't think that it's like if this card was minus 2K maybe, but I don't see the upside of the card being significant enough that you'd actually run it over Red Force, and even Red Forces maybe only run at 2 copies at best.
okay, I can one up you there. Monet, like Monet is a card, and this will cost you 2 Don anyways, but Monet refunds those Don somehow usefully. This does not. Like this is just worse. So yeah, these types of cards have existed before. Like Black has, I think, 2K Sasaki, but he's a 2K. That's important. Like from Animal Kingdom Pirates, who taps himself and 1 Don to -2 something. And this is, I think, first time Red has got an effect like this. Like, don't quote me on it. I think I remember the card well, but could be mistaken. And yeah, this is just like a worse Monet. Like, it's surprising to me because when you see the type Supernova, Straw Hat, even film, you would think like maybe Red Green Law would want to use this, but Red Green Law has Monet, and if he wants something that he can bounce back and play again, why spend 2 Don when you can just do it with Otama as well? Yeah, I feel first it's odd that there is a Luffy card in the Shanks structure deck, but also it's just not a good Luffy card, I think.
Probably true.
Yeah, no. Lots of weird additions honestly in the Shanks deck.
And the Bird Woman, like
Bird Woman. Well, now that we've talked about all of the decks, although we've been going on for a while, I do kind of think that we want to kind of recontextualize it in OP11 and kind of see like maybe some like early meta predictions where you might think that these decks might fall into the meta. The OP11 meta before the start decks, where it kind of ended in Japan, is with blue purple Luffy at the top, green purple and purple Luffy around the same tier, and then decks like Bella Betty, Lucci, Red Zoro, Blackbeard, all kind of one tier under that. Where do you think that, maybe let's go in color order for this. Where do you think that Shanks might fit into this?
Personally, I think it's probably below that Blackbeard tier. I just don't think it can compete with not only the top purple decks, but also just the rest of the mid range decks that are trying to beat Blue Purple Luffy. I think Shanks naturally has a bad matchup into, so kind of unfortunate,
Yeah,
just off the radar for me.
I agree. I think
yeah.
he's not in the picture.
For this section, maybe I guess given that maybe this isn't exactly how your tier list is going to be, but like blue purple Luffy as tier 1, green purple and purple as 2, and then the other decks they mentioned as tier 3. I guess we'll say that this deck is maybe a tier 4 deck. First impressions.
At the very least, yeah,
Yeah,
probably tier 4.
yeah, I think
It's not
that's
how I
fair.
usually define
Next,
decks,
moving
but
on.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go like S, A, B, C?
No, I usually just think, can this deck top? And if it tops, can it win? or I can make a deep run, and I look at Shanks and I think like maybe if like 20 players in a room bring it, maybe one can top. That's like the power level I see Shanks being at.
Got it. Yeah.
I think that's a nice way to look at it too.
Yeah.
The next start deck is Green Bonney. Green Bonney getting the Law and Beppo as well as Kid Killer. Maybe not necessarily the plan that she wants to go to, but another option for her. Where do you guys think this might fit, Yonas?
Personally, I'd probably put it around tier 3. I do think that the green cards can line up well against decks like what was it, like Zoro or Bella Betty, to try to really slow the game down. However, I'm not entirely sure that and also it's going to be pretty good against like green purple and purple black, but I'm not entirely sure if it can compete against blue purple. Has naturally been having problems with Blackbeard and Lucci, so I think it's probably tier 3, but it might be able to squeak into tier 2 if like green purple and purple black and these other aggro decks are really popular.
See, Bonney, I think, if a dedicated player takes her to an event in OP11, they would have a chance to top. Like, it would be better than Shanks, but not by a large margin. You're hoping on matchup luck, and because her bad matchups are really bad. Like, especially the way that Lucci has been designed to be blue purple, specifically like with this massive like cost reduction options, completely annihilates Bonney. And then obviously a Teach and the blue purple just pulling so far ahead through ramping. I feel like she has as many terrible matchups as she has good ones, and the good ones are not even guaranteed wins. Because Zoro can take Mulgans, Green Purple can like push away with like Gamma Knives and whatnot. So like there's no guarantee with Bonney. That's my problem. So yeah, I would agree. Like tier 3 sounds like the place.
Yeah. I think there's a random resurgence of Bonney kind of towards the end of OP11 in Japan. I think that's just kind of just people getting bored of playing Blue Purple Luffy because it doesn't actually really win that matchup. I think that the deck has enough decent matchups that people will be encouraged to play the deck. It might be a hard feat to actually win a regional with it. The next deck is Blue Buggy, the one that we talked about at the very beginning. I think that we generally rated it pretty highly. Hrvoje, what do you think about this deck within the context of the meta?
I could see it doing decently well. I feel like it's such an unusual deck to play in a sense that it's not going to be very popular. It's like a combination of the character and how the deck plays, but I do see some potential in it. Like, I think it's good matchups it can completely blow away, and it has like a good holding into aggro. So really, the real test will be how much it can handle like the really bad matchups in green purple. And I'm not even sure how Uchi works now that there's the Crocodile and Mihawk card for protection in the deck. But yeah, overall, I think a safe place to put it would be like near the bottom of tier 2. But I would not be too surprised if it places higher.
I think
would agree
it'll
that.
largely. Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Good.
I would think it's probably similarly at the bottom of tier 2. But that's mostly speculative. The deck, I think, has a lot of power. Really getting early aggressive starts in and putting it in like multiple 7K bodies very quickly. I just don't know how that deck's going to play out in practice. Just because, like Hrvoje mentioned, that the playstyle is just very unconventional compared to a lot of different One Piece decks. So without just getting a sufficient number of reps in, understanding a lot of how the deck plays, you're not going to be able to have a really clear understanding of a lot of its matchup spreads.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the power of the deck is going to hinge on how well it actually does into Blue Purple Luffy, given the sort of resource advantage that Blue Purple Luffy can build. But if that matchup ends up being okay, I can totally see it being kind of top of tier 2. If it does better into the other matchups, maybe even break into tier 1. But as it stands right now, maybe it's safe to say that it is kind of a low tier 2, but still better than the other decks that we've mentioned so far. The purple deck, and one that we were all pretty excited about, was Purple Black Luffy. Do you think that these new options, the consistency in 3-cost Robin, the new defensive and offensive capabilities of 6-cost Luffy, are going to be enough to bring it into the higher tiers? Yonas.
Personally, yes, I agree. It's probably going to be tier 1.5, kind of within the realm of the other purple Luffy decks. I just think that this deck has a lot of very powerful aggressive tools, and the 7K Luffy is just somehow more powerful than people even think it is in terms of being a very powerful racing tool. So I'm very, very high on that deck. I think it's probably going to be one of the better decks. But I think it also has a fair amount of weaknesses that people might be able to tech for. But as of the current OP11 metagame that I'm expecting, I think it's very promising.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think there's some weaknesses that the deck will have to shore up in deck building, mainly as people gain experience and test it more into the meta field. Notably, the 8 on turn is like the biggest, like, what are you going to do on that turn that really decides the direction of your deck, whether it's going to be an aggressive play or a more controlling play, because you have stuff like Isho, you have rush characters, you can play the 8-cost Katakuri. And which of these options will fare the best against the meta, I'm not sure, but I do agree. I would expect it to join like the, what's the word, echelons or something of Luffy leaders,
Echelons.
which echelons. Okay, yeah, I know how it's spelled, but like I have no idea how to pronounce it, so I'm not sure why I went for it. Like, felt brave. I felt brave. But yeah, it's a Gum Gum Giant abuser, and it's the best platform or core for this absurd 6-cost Luffy. So as long as it can capitalize on that insane power boost of consistently being a 7k leader, I would expect it to do well. And also, like Yonas, I believe more in the aggressive way than in the defensive is where it will shine.
Yeah, I'm very excited for the deck as a very aggressive option for these purple Luffys that are generally kind of mid-rangey to almost control-y. So going to be interesting how that deck ends up playing out within the meta. One matchup that maybe might be a concern for it, and another deck that is being buffed is, of course, Black Teach. What do you think about this deck that's already in the OP10 meta, at least very high tier? Maybe this is before EV, but
Yeah.
relatively high tier.
Yeah, if you want to consider it like tier 2 in the beginning of OP or during your OP11 format in Japan, I think it also reaches a tier 1.5 meta or like tier in terms of power level with mainly the introduction of the 6-cost Kuzan. I think the extra resource attrition is going to make that deck a slight hair better, and it's going to give the deck a lot more staying power against these like very, very aggressive leaning decks. Um, whether that's good enough to beat blue purple consistently is going to be a difficult thing to figure out. And I think that people can tech for it with a bunch of different weird cards, whether that's playing Top Knot in your purple black Luffy deck, whether that's playing 8-cost Secret Luffy in your blue purple Luffy deck, playing Luna even in your green purple deck. There's gonna be a lot of ways to kind of navigate playing against this deck. But I do think that the power level is there to compete, and it's now the onus on the other decks to make sure they're sufficiently prepared to have answers for it.
Honestly, I think Blackbeard, as it's played right now in EBO2, is already like a tier 1.5 deck. I think it's one of the best decks currently in the game, and I don't think that necessarily changes in OP11, but I think he gets like his toolbox is stretched thinner because he does get new cards, but there's this really strong meta contender that requires a different playstyle than the current best deck does. Which to play against green purple Luffy, I think stalling for 10 cost with small blockers is the best playstyle. But I think against blue purple, the removal, turn your augur sideways, then KO their stuff, is the stronger way to play. And then these are kind of clashing playstyles in terms of deck building. And I think that's where like the biggest challenge for Blackbeard will be in OP11 meta. I would still expect him to be strong, maybe fall off a bit because he has to split his attention between the different Luffys and still like maintain some level of agency against Agor decks such as Bello, Betty, and Zoro, which will emerge as counters to blue purple even more, but they also kind of, at least Zoro, pressure Blackbeard quite powerfully. So I think 1.5 is, I'm not sure, 1.5 or 2. It's difficult for me to decide, but I would rate him like on the higher end with the new support.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Even in the current OP11 meta, he's still a pretty decent meta contender, so a deck like that getting more support is kind of scary, so definitely interesting to see. The final deck is Yamato, which Hrvoje, you are very excited about, so how do you feel it might do into the meta?
Keep in mind, I'm excited with like zero experience on it, so like complete, shot in the dark. I mean, full aggro deck that can punish blue purple. At that point, the question is, can do it better than Betty? I do not believe it can. And if I had to rank Betty, I would say she's 1.5. So I cannot put Yamato above that, and even like 2 sounds too high for what I'm expecting her to be able to do. So a shot in the dark complete guess, I will say like tier 3 at best, because there should be better and more reliable aggro strategies, but I will be glad to be proven wrong.
Fortunately, also in the same boat. It's going to be a tier 3 deck in my head. But there are a lot of brilliant deck builders and people that have played Yamato for much longer than I ever have that might be seeing some tools or combinations of cards that might make this deck closer to tier 2. However, like I just don't really, I haven't really put in the time or I've seen the vision in terms of what that would look like.
Yeah, that's fair. The point that we were talking about, playing around the 5 cost Momonosuke a bit more to play a little bit more defensively, might give it a couple more options compared to the more aggressive style of Yamato, which has historically very struggled a lot into blue purple Luffy. So definitely going to be kind of up to the deck builders to see what they can do with tools like a cuss kid within a generally aggressive feeling deck. We'll see. But anyways, it was a very long episode. I'm thankful that you guys were all here. People still listening up to this point, thank you as well, because it was a very long one. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let us know any sort of interesting topics that you want us to cover, and we read the comments, so maybe it'll act as inspiration for us in the coming episodes. I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Still working on getting it to Spotify because it's a little bit more complicated than I thought. Do you guys have any last things, or should we just sign off?
Yeah, let's just sign off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Okay. Thank you for watching.
Yeah. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye bye.